There's a strange layer to the self, a second layer, or perhaps an echo of it. It's not quite awareness, nor is it something more than that. It's as if the mind steps back, watches itself, and asks, "Am I aware?" But this doesn't come from some higher plane. It's the mind, simply reflecting on its own activity. This is the premise of higher-order thought theories. Consciousness is, in a sense, a thought about a thought, a mind reflecting upon itself. When we recognize an experience, this recognition is the consciousness, but it's not the sensation or the perception itself. It is a thought standing above it, observing from a detached vantage point, a kind of witness to the original event. Picture an object in front of you. A cup, perhaps. It exists. You see it, feel it, know it. But within higher-order thought theory, consciousness doesn't simply emerge from seeing the cup. It arises from the thought that acknowledges, "I am seeing the cup." The object itself doesn't stir the mind. No, the mind is stirred by its own awareness of the object. But what of the moments before that awareness? The moments of pure perception, unreflected, instinctive, automatic. The theory doesn't quite account for these. It's as if we are meant to believe that the mere act of observing something is a thought unto itself, without explaining where the thought itself arises from. It dances at the edge of understanding, elusive, teasing. The mind is a paradox in this sense. How can it observe itself? How does it rise above its own activity and know itself as distinct from everything it processes? Theories like this attempt to pull the veil back, only to discover there's nothing behind it, just more of the same. The mind, an endless mirror reflecting its own image. Perhaps it is not that the mind has failed to explain anything at all. Perhaps the true failing is that it has explained too much. Each attempt to encapsulate consciousness in a theory only exposes how little we actually know. The more we look for the source of awareness, the further away it seems to drift, so we are left with this question. If consciousness is not a singular experience, but a secondary thought layered over a deeper, unknowable foundation, what does it even mean to be conscious? Is there a point where awareness begins, or is it all just a construction, layered upon layers, each thought only leading to another? Higher-order thought theories promise that there is something more, that the mind can be understood from the inside out, and yet they leave us with a deeper mystery. If awareness is only the awareness of awareness, where is the root? What is the source of the first knowing? In some ways, these theories suggest a kind of infinite regression. You know that you know, but can you ever reach the moment before the knowing began? Can you trace awareness to its origin, or do you always arrive too late, as though the answer is just out of reach, beyond the frame? There's a quiet humility in this. It's as though consciousness, when scrutinized closely enough, slips through your fingers. Each theory, each model, each framework only brings us one step closer to the understanding of the mind, but never quite reveals it. The more we observe, the more it remains ungraspable. We often think of consciousness as a single, cohesive phenomenon, something that can be understood once the right theory is discovered. But perhaps it's not one thing at all. Perhaps it is, like the mind itself, a reflection, a mirror with no original image. Just endless reflections back into themselves, folding inward in infinite patterns. And yet in this complexity, there is a sense of comfort. It means the mind is vast, uncontainable by simple definitions. No theory can truly explain it, because it is something more than explanation. It is the ineffable, an experience that can be felt, but never fully understood. But what if the theory is irrelevant? What if, in this endless unfolding of thought upon thought, the search for meaning has become the meaning itself? Perhaps the mind is not something that can be explained, only experienced, only lived, and so the search continues, an endless loop, a perpetual motion. The paradox grows. The more you try to define consciousness, the more you find that it cannot be contained. It slips between the cracks of any neat theory, no matter how well-intentioned. Higher-order thought, in its pursuit of self-reflection, only unveils another layer of mystery. The search becomes a journey, a process rather than a destination. Consciousness isn't something you arrive at. It's something you live through, moment by moment, thought by thought, always just beyond the horizon of clear understanding. And perhaps that's the way it was always meant to be. So we continue, each of us walking through our lives, asking, what is consciousness? And though we may never find the answer, we are reminded, in the quiet spaces between our thoughts, that the question itself is part of the experience. And that too is part of the mystery. As we peer deeper, seeking understanding, the mind pulls us further away, just out of reach, not cruelly, but gently. The knowing slips through our fingers, and yet in this elusive quality, it invites us to stay, to reflect, to keep wondering. There's no end to the questions we ask, and perhaps there's no need for one. There's a stage, a place where the mind's various activities come together, meet, and share their thoughts. But this stage is not always visible. It's there in the background, like a silent conductor, coordinating everything without drawing attention to itself. This is where the global workspace theory begins. Imagine all the different parts of your mind working at once. One part keeps track of your memories. Another solves problems. Another watches the world around you. They all function separately, doing their jobs, but something deeper connects them. The global workspace theory suggests this connection is like a stage where everything gathers to be noticed. On this stage, only the most important pieces are seen. It's not like the whole show is on display at once. No, only the spotlight shines on what matters most in the moment. Your mind isn't focusing on everything all the time. Instead, it picks and chooses what should be brought to attention. When a thought becomes conscious, it's like the mind is deciding that this idea is worthy of being on stage. Before that, it might have just been background noise, unnoticed, waiting for its turn. But once it steps into the light, it becomes a thought you are aware of, something you know. The global workspace theory suggests that consciousness is a process of sharing. Different parts of the brain, each with its own task, share their findings in this special space. When one part of the mind needs the help of another, it calls out, asking for attention, and the others respond. But what happens when nothing is on stage? When your mind is still quiet, without any thoughts demanding to be noticed, the global workspace theory doesn't offer answers for those moments. It's not designed to explain what happens when the spotlight is turned off. But it does offer insight into what occurs when we become aware of something. For example, when you read a book, you may not notice every word, every sentence, or every detail. But when something catches your eye, it's like the mind decides, this is worth noticing. And so it steps into the light. The rest of the book, the parts not in the spotlight, fade into the background. This idea suggests that consciousness isn't something that exists in a constant state. Instead, it's a spotlight that moves, that shines on different thoughts and ideas when they're needed most. And in that spotlight, those ideas become real to you. They are seen, acknowledged, experienced. But consider this: what happens when something stays in the dark? Something you're not aware of, but that still exists in your mind. The global workspace theory doesn't explain how we access the things we don't bring into the spotlight. It only helps us understand why some things are seen while others remain hidden. Perhaps that's the mystery. How does the mind decide what to bring into the spotlight? Is there a pattern, a reason behind which thoughts appear and which ones don't? Or is it random, guided by something deeper, something we can't yet understand? Even if we can't fully answer that, the theory leaves us with a sense of quiet wonder. If the mind is constantly deciding what deserves our attention, how much of our lives are lived in the shadows, unnoticed? How many thoughts pass through without us ever knowing they were there? The global workspace theory suggests a kind of order, a way for our minds to work together. But it also leaves open the possibility that we may never truly see everything within us. The spotlight doesn't shine on everything. Some things stay hidden, and maybe that's just how it is. The mind stage is always shifting. What was once in the spotlight can fade into the background, replaced by something new. There's a constant flow, a constant movement, as the mind shifts from thought to thought. And in that movement, something fascinating happens. We become aware of what needs our attention. The theory doesn't try to explain everything. It doesn't solve every riddle of the mind. Instead, it offers a glimpse into how awareness works, how our minds choose what to bring into focus. In that sense, it's less of an answer and more of a doorway. Perhaps consciousness isn't a singular thing after all. Perhaps it's like a collection of moments, each one fleeting, each one passing by, until the mind decides to capture one. It's the decision of what to notice that makes all the difference, that shapes what we know and experience. And so the global workspace theory leaves us with an important question: what makes something worth noticing? What brings a thought into the light, into the space where we can see it, understand it, become aware of it? That is the space where our consciousness comes alive. As we look at the theory, it becomes clear that consciousness is a process, a dynamic play of attention. And in that play, we are both the audience and the performers, constantly shifting focus, always moving through the spotlight, always just a step away from the next thought. A thought forms, drifts for a moment, then dissipates. Another rises, takes its place, and begins to shape the mind. It seems simple, doesn't it? But what if we're wrong? What if thoughts don't emerge in neat, tidy lines at all, but rather in fragments, each incomplete, overlapping, each vying for attention? This is where the multiple drafts model begins. The theory suggests that our consciousness is like a story being written in real time, each draft being rewritten, revisited, and altered as the mind processes experience. There is no single moment where the final true version emerges. Instead, consciousness is a fluid process of revision. Imagine trying to recall an event from your day. The memory isn't static, it shifts as you think about it. You might remember one thing, then another, and gradually, the story of your day changes, becoming clearer or more confused. This process doesn't happen in a single smooth flow. It's the mind editing itself constantly, over and over. Every time you think about something, you're not simply retrieving a fixed memory. Instead, you are rewriting it, adjusting it, based on new ideas, new experiences, new drafts. The mind doesn't simply store information, it continually reinterprets, revises and updates its understanding of the world. The story of your life, is never finished. In the multiple drafts model, consciousness isn't something that happens in one final moment of clarity. It's more like an ongoing process, a collection of different versions of a story. Each draft offers a different perspective. You might recall an event in one way today and remember it differently tomorrow. Both versions are true, but neither is the final truth. It's as if your mind is constantly editing a book, writing and rewriting, crafting a narrative of your existence. Sometimes the drafts are clear, easy to understand. Other times, they're messy, incomplete. But they're all part of the same story, each layer building upon the last, each draft adding something new. The problem with this model is that it challenges our belief in a singular fixed consciousness. If we're constantly rewriting our experiences, what does that say about who we are, or what it means to be conscious? If there's no final draft, no ultimate version of our awareness, where does that leave us? Perhaps it means that consciousness is more fluid than we imagine. It is not a static state, but something constantly shifting, changing with every thought, every perception. The drafts are never finished. They are always in motion, always adapting, always rewriting themselves. This process is not something we are usually aware of. We think of ourselves as having a fixed sense of self, a stable story that runs through our minds. But the multiple drafts model suggests that this stability is an illusion. What we think of as our conscious experience is a blend of multiple drafts, all competing for attention, all existing at the same time. Imagine reading a book where the ending keeps changing. One moment it's one way, and the next, it's something entirely different. The story never truly settles, never truly reaches its final form. That is how consciousness might work. It is a continuous process of revision, one that never truly reaches an end. In this light, the self doesn't seem so fixed, It's more like a collection of overlapping stories, versions of you that are written and rewritten as you move through life. What you are aware of today might be different from what you were aware of yesterday, but both versions of yourself are equally real. The drafts never stop coming. What does this say about the nature of truth? If every draft of a thought is a little different, does that mean truth is something that is always shifting? It would seem so. The truth of a moment is not the final word on that moment, but rather part of an ongoing process. Truth, like consciousness, is a draft that never truly settles. And yet this shifting, this constant change, doesn't necessarily mean that we are lost. In fact, it suggests that we are incredibly adaptable, able to create and recreate our understanding of the world around us. We are not static beings, locked into one unchanging perspective. We are constantly evolving, rewriting our own stories. This fluidity might explain some of the mysteries of memory. Why do we often remember events differently than others remember them? Why do our own memories change over time? If we are constantly revising, rewriting, and revisiting our experiences, it makes sense that our memories would shift too. They are drafts, just like the rest of our thoughts. But does this make us unreliable narrators of our own lives? Perhaps the idea that we are always rewriting our stories might suggest that we are never fully in control of the version of ourselves we present to the world. But it also suggests that this is a part of what it means to be human, to live in a state of constant revision, of constant change. If consciousness is a series of drafts, then there is no final draft. There is no perfect version of ourselves, no completed narrative. We are always in the process of becoming, never fully finished, always shifting, always adapting. This is both unsettling and freeing. We are never locked into one version of ourselves, but always fluid, always evolving, so we might never reach the final version of our consciousness. But in that uncertainty, we find something more important, the freedom to rewrite, to revise, to become. Our consciousness is not a static object, but a story still being written, with every thought and every experience adding a new page. There is a view of the mind, cold and direct, that suggests consciousness itself is an illusion, a simple trick of the brain, something that will one day be forgotten in the pursuit of knowledge. In this view, the very idea of awareness is an outdated concept, a placeholder for something deeper, something yet to be discovered. This is the essence of Eliminative Materialism. It proposes that our everyday understanding of consciousness, our sense of self, the inner voice we listen to in quiet moments, these are nothing but old myths, no more accurate than the stories we once told about the stars. The mind, the theory suggests, is not what we think it is. What if we are simply mistaken in how we describe ourselves? What if the inner experience we call consciousness is just a flawed interpretation of brain activity? This theory doesn't seek to explain consciousness as a phenomenon. Instead, it suggests we may be chasing the wrong question altogether, asking the wrong thing, using the wrong words. Eliminative materialism holds that what we call thoughts or feelings are not things at all, but constructs, like shadows cast by the true workings of the brain. Our sense of self, our personal narrative, is an illusion, a temporary arrangement of neurons firing in patterns that mimic what we experience as a conscious mind. But none of it is real, at least not in the way we think. Consider the idea that the mind is like a collection of electrical signals, each one firing without any sense of meaning, just activity. If the brain could be stripped of its illusions, what would be left? The theory suggests that the entire fabric of what we know as the mind would unravel into simple, impersonal processes, neurons firing, chemicals moving, nothing more. If this is true, then consciousness as we understand it would fade away, swallowed by the very brain that gave birth to it. The mind would not be something that exists in the way we think it does. There would be no self, no experience, no awareness, only the body, functioning without the need for anything else. But then, what of the rich inner life we each carry with us? What of the feelings, the experiences, the moments that seem so undeniably real? The The theory doesn't deny these experiences, they exist after all, but it dismisses the idea that they mean anything. They are simply the byproduct of processes that we mistakenly label as consciousness. To think of the mind as something more than the sum of its parts is a mistake. Eliminative materialism insists the mind is no more than a product of material processes, like a shadow cast by the movement of the sun. If we trace it back far enough, we find no substance to it, only the effects of physical forces working through the brain. This idea doesn't leave much room for the mystery of awareness. There's no space for the questions that puzzle us about the nature of thought, of experience, of being. If we were to fully embrace this view, we would be forced to accept that everything we experience as consciousness is no more than a brief, inexplicable flicker in the vast machinery of the brain. The deeper we go, the more unsettling it becomes. If we take away the idea of the mind as a unique conscious entity, we're left with an unsettling emptiness. It's as if we've been told a story our whole lives, only to realize it was never true. We are nothing more than complex biological machines, running through the motions. But here too lies the paradox. If our awareness is an illusion, if it's just the outcome of physical processes, how do we explain the feeling of knowing, the awareness that we have thoughts at all? How do we account for the sense of being conscious if consciousness itself doesn't exist? The theory doesn't give us an answer. It just tells us that the question may be irrelevant. In a way, this theory demands a shift in how we view our lives. If we accept that consciousness is just a fleeting illusion, it changes everything. There's no longer any need to search for meaning in our experience of being. The mind is nothing more than the product of mechanical processes, a complex functioning system, no more special than a clock or a computer. But even so, we continue to live as if our minds matter. We think, feel, and experience the world as if there is a self doing the thinking, feeling, and experiencing. Perhaps in this way, eliminative materialism forces us to reconsider everything we know about who we are and how we relate to the world around us. It challenges our deepest assumptions, asking us to question everything, even our own existence. Yet in the quiet spaces, the mind keeps turning, the questions keep arising. Even if consciousness is only an illusion, the experience of it is still felt, it is still part of our lives. Perhaps even without meaning, there is something beautiful in that, the fleeting nature of experience, the quiet awareness that we are here, for just a moment, in a world that may not need us to be anything more than a passing flicker. If we are nothing more than electrical patterns, then what does it mean to be alive, to be aware? How does the mind in all its complexity give rise to such a rich experience of life? Maybe, in the end, the question doesn't have to be answered. Perhaps it's enough to simply experience it, however fleeting, however illusory. There's a strange idea, one that almost feels like it's a side note in the vast conversation about the mind. It whispers that consciousness is not really part of the equation at all. It's like the steam rising from a kettle, not the thing that drives the engine, but a byproduct, a reflection of something deeper. This idea is called Epiphenomenalism. It suggests that consciousness exists, but it's not the cause of anything. It's simply an effect, a shadow cast by the workings of the brain. The brain processes, moves, reacts, but all of that happens without any need for awareness to direct or influence it. In this view, the mind is a passenger, not the driver. Thoughts, emotions, perceptions, these are all just ripples on the surface of a much deeper, more complex process happening beneath. The brain does all the heavy lifting, while consciousness simply tags along for the ride, observing but never truly participating. It's as if consciousness is the echo of the brain's activity, not the force behind it. The brain thinks, acts, and feels, and we experience the consequences. But what we experience is not what is actually moving us. It's a side effect, a mirror showing us the movement, but not creating it. This raises an uncomfortable question. If consciousness doesn't influence the brain, if it's just an afterthought, does that mean our awareness of the world is entirely unnecessary? Could we live our lives just as well, just as fully, without ever knowing we exist? It's a thought that feels almost impossible to entertain, Yet that's the suggestion of epiphenomenalism. The theory doesn't deny consciousness exists, it acknowledges that we feel things, think things, experience the world around us. But it tells us that all of this is just a byproduct of neural processes, not the reason for them. In other words, our awareness is a passenger, not a driver. Imagine a car speeding down a road. The car moves, the wheels turn, and the engine hums along. But what if the dashboard light, the thing that tells you the car is moving, didn't actually affect how the car moved? It would still move, just the same, with or without the light. The light would be there, shining brightly, but it would have no real effect on the car's motion. In this metaphor, consciousness is like that dashboard light. It tells us about the world, about our thoughts, about our emotions, but it doesn't shape any of it. The real action is happening elsewhere, deep within the brain, and our awareness is merely along for the ride, watching it all unfold. This can be a difficult thought to sit with. It challenges the deeply held belief that we as conscious beings have control over our thoughts and actions. If epiphenomenalism is right, then what we think of as our will, our decision-making, might just be the illusion, while the true driving force is hidden beneath the surface. Yet there's something almost liberating in this. If our thoughts don't shape our actions, if consciousness doesn't control the brain, then it's not our fault when things go wrong. We're not the ones steering the ship. Instead, we're the ones watching it move, powerless to change the course. Epiphenomenalism also helps explain why consciousness feels so separate from the rest of the body. If our awareness doesn't influence the brain's activity, then it makes sense that our sense of self, of agency, can feel disconnected from our physical actions. The mind feels like it's watching from a distance, while the body does its own thing, but the theory leaves us with a lingering question. If we are merely passive observers, then what are we here for? If our awareness doesn't affect the world, if it doesn't change anything, does it really matter that we experience anything at all? Perhaps the answer lies in the fact that we can still feel, even if we are not the cause of anything, we are still able to perceive it. Maybe it's enough that we exist as we are. Even if consciousness doesn't shape the world, it still allows us to experience it. Perhaps the real value of consciousness is not in its power to change, but in its ability to be present, to witness the unfolding of life without needing to control it. And yet, if consciousness is just a byproduct, a reflection of brain processes, then what does it mean for our personal sense of meaning? If we are merely observing and not shaping the world, then where does our purpose come from? It's an unsettling question, one that epiphenomenalism doesn't answer. It just leaves it hanging, like the faintest of echoes. In the quiet spaces, we are left to wonder about the nature of our experience. If consciousness is simply the byproduct of the brain, then what does it mean to be aware? Is the experience of being aware enough, or must it have purpose, direction, meaning? Perhaps, in the end, it's enough to simply witness, to be part of this vast, unfolding process. What if everything you feel, everything you think, is simply an illusion, a trick of the mind, a game it plays with itself? In this view, consciousness is not the foundation of our existence, but a fleeting experience, a momentary reflection in a vast sea of unconscious processes. This idea isn't just a thought, it's a challenge to how we see ourselves. It says that consciousness, the very thing we use to define our existence, might not be real at all. It's like a story we tell ourselves to explain the world, but the truth is, there is no real self at the center of it all. Think about your thoughts. They come and go, often without any clear control or intention. One moment, you're thinking about lunch. The next, you're lost in memories, or perhaps you're planning what to do next. If you pause, you might feel that you are the one guiding these thoughts. But what if you are just watching them unfold without truly deciding where they go? The brain is constantly processing, making decisions, and reacting to the world around us. But this doesn't require the experience of consciousness. In fact, it's possible that consciousness is simply a byproduct of all the activity in the brain, a shadow cast by the brain's complex operations, not the cause of them. Imagine walking down the street. Your brain processes everything you see, hear, and feel. Your body moves, responds, reacts. You don't think about every step you take, every motion you make. The mind is not directing these actions consciously. It's a smooth, automatic process. Consciousness in this view is a momentary illusion, a byproduct of the brain's activity. But we don't experience the world this way. We feel as though we are the ones in control, choosing each thought, each movement. We feel that we are the ones making decisions. But perhaps this is an illusion. The mind tricks itself into thinking it has control, when in reality, it's simply along for the ride, watching as events unfold. This idea shakes our deepest sense of self. If consciousness is just an illusion, then what does it mean to be? Are we simply bodies moving through space, reacting to external forces, with no true awareness of what we are? If consciousness is an illusion, then what is left of us once we strip away that sense of being? In some ways, this is deeply unsettling. The feeling of being you, of having a self, of experiencing the world from your own unique perspective, seems so undeniable. How could that be false? But if consciousness is an illusion, then maybe what we feel as self is just another story our mind tells, a comforting narrative to make sense of the world. What happens when we look beyond this illusion? If we acknowledge that consciousness is not what we think it is, then what do we see in its place? Perhaps, in its absence, we might find something simpler, something more fundamental. We are not the storytellers of our lives, but the stories themselves. In this view, consciousness is not the engine driving our actions, but merely a passenger, observing without affecting the journey. The mind creates the illusion of control, of awareness, but in reality, everything unfolds without our conscious input. The thoughts we have are not chosen. They simply arise, one after the other, without our direction. What if instead of looking for meaning in our experience, we simply accepted that there is no central I directing it? What if we let go of the need to define ourselves as conscious beings and simply allowed the events of the mind to unfold without needing to assign them any deeper significance? This doesn't mean that the experience of being isn't real. It just means that the experience itself is not what we think it is. It's like a dream we believe to be true, only to wake up and realize that it was never real to begin with. Consciousness isn't the driver of the dream. It's just a part of the dream itself, floating along without ever truly controlling it. What remains when we strip away the illusion of consciousness? Perhaps in the silence that follows, we can simply exist without the need to define that existence, without the need for an inner voice to tell us what it all means. In this view, we are not conscious beings, but simply processes unfolding in a vast, indifferent universe. This idea leaves us with a quiet, almost peaceful realization. If consciousness is not the center of our experience, then we are free from the weight of trying to understand it. We no longer need to search for the self, because the self is not something that exists outside the flow of thoughts and experiences. It's just another part of the story. In this quiet space, the mind is free to move without the burden of consciousness. It can simply be. The illusion of self fades, and we find that the world continues just as it always has, without needing our awareness to make it real. The world doesn't need us to be conscious for it to exist, and so consciousness, if it is an illusion, doesn't make our existence any less meaningful. It simply means that our understanding of who we are is incomplete. The true nature of being may lie beyond our current perception, in the vastness of a mind that simply moves, acts, and exists without needing to know why. The world moves around us, and we seemingly respond to it. We see a ball coming toward us, and without thinking, we reach out our hand to catch it. But what if the brain isn't simply reacting to what happens? What if instead, it is constantly predicting what will happen next? This idea is known as predictive processing. It suggests that our minds don't just passively observe the world, they actively try to predict it, creating expectations about what is going to happen before it happens. The brain is constantly running these predictions, adjusting and refining them as new information comes in. Imagine walking down a path. Your brain is already predicting the ground beneath your feet. It's making guesses about what the next step will feel like, how the texture will change, whether it will be soft or hard. As you take each step, your brain updates its prediction based on what it senses. The world isn't being experienced in real time, but as a prediction that's constantly refined. This process is happening constantly beneath the surface of our awareness. Every sound, every movement, every sensation is processed as a prediction first. Your brain is never just reacting to the world, it's actively shaping your perception of it based on what it expects to happen. In a way, we are living inside a simulation created by our own minds. Now think of a surprising moment. Maybe you walk into a room and something unexpected happens. Someone shouts your name or a picture falls from the wall. The brain didn't predict that. It was caught off guard, and so your mind has to adjust quickly. In that moment, your brain updates its model, learning from the surprise and using it to improve future predictions. The interesting thing about predictive processing is that it doesn't just apply to external events. It also applies to our internal experience, the way we feel, the thoughts that arise in our minds. Your brain is constantly predicting how you'll feel in a situation, even before you've fully experienced it. It's shaping your emotional responses based on past experiences, shaping your world from the inside out. This means that when you feel nervous before a big event, it's not just your body reacting to the situation. Your brain is predicting that the event will cause you to feel nervous, and it starts preparing for that. It's your brain doing its job, anticipating the future, guiding your actions and emotions before they fully unfold. But here's the twist: the brain is often wrong. The predictions it makes are not always accurate. That's why we feel surprised, or confused, or even shocked when something happens that our brain didn't see coming. And when the prediction is wrong, the brain quickly adjusts, refining its model, trying to get it right next time. This constant cycle of prediction, action, and adjustment is what keeps us moving through the world. It's like a dance between our expectations and reality. Our brains are constantly testing the boundaries of what we know, adjusting our understanding, shaping how we experience everything from a conversation to a sunset. At first, this might seem like a small thing, just a few guesses and adjustments here and there. But this process is happening on a vast scale, influencing nearly everything we do. Every interaction with the world is shaped by the brain's constant predictions, creating a framework that defines how we understand reality. What does this mean for consciousness? If the brain is constantly predicting, then maybe consciousness itself is part of the prediction. Perhaps we don't experience the world directly. Instead, we experience the brain's best guess at what is happening. The world we live in might be just a projection, a series of predictions made by a mind trying to make sense of the unknown. But if the brain is simply predicting, then who are we in this process? Are we the ones making the predictions, or are we just living in the predictions themselves? If consciousness is just a side effect of all this prediction making, how do we separate ourselves from the process? Are we merely the product of the brain's ongoing calculations? The more we consider this, the more we realize how much of what we experience is shaped by the mind's expectations. We don't see the world as it truly is. We see the world as our brain thinks it is. Our perceptions, our emotions, even our actions, are all based on models created by the brain, not on direct, unfiltered experience. Perhaps this is why we sometimes feel disconnected from the world around us. We are not experiencing things directly. Instead, we are living in a world that has been predicted and shaped by the mind. The more accurate the brain's predictions, the more seamless our experience seems. But when those predictions fail, we are jolted back into reality, forced to confront the world as it is, without the lens of our expectations. So, if our consciousness is really just a byproduct of our brain's predictions, what happens when the predictions break down? When they fail to account for the unexpected, the unknown, in those moments we might feel lost, disoriented, as if the world has slipped out of focus. The mind struggles to make sense of what's happening, trying to reestablish its predictions and bring us back to a familiar, expected reality. In this light, consciousness doesn't feel like a fixed thing, something that's always the same. Instead, it's more like a flow, a process shaped by the brain's constant predictions. We are not static beings, but dynamic, ever-changing patterns of thought, action, and experience, all shaped by the mind's best guess at the world. The beauty of this model is that it gives us a glimpse of the mind's vast capacity to create and shape our experience. It shows us that we are not passive observers of the world, but active participants, constantly shaping our reality through the predictions we make, the expectations we hold, and the adjustments we make as we move through the world. There's a peculiar thought, a quiet shift in how we understand ourselves. We often believe that consciousness is tied to a self, a center of awareness, a place from which all experience flows. But what if that's not true? What if consciousness doesn't need a self at all to exist? In this view, consciousness is not about a me, sitting inside the mind, watching the world unfold. Instead, it's like the flow of a river, a stream of awareness, without a single solid point of control. The self isn't the anchor of consciousness, it's just an illusion, a fleeting moment that seems to exist but doesn't really. We experience the world, sights, sounds, emotions, but we do not need a permanent self to experience it. There's nothing at the center of the experience that holds it all together. It's not that there's no awareness, it's just that awareness doesn't belong to anyone, doesn't have a fixed place from which it springs. If you think about a memory, it seems to exist in time, doesn't it? But the memory itself doesn't have a keeper. It just arises, like a wave, and then fades away. No one is there, holding on to the memory. It's simply a part of the flow of experience, a fleeting presence in the moment. In this sense, consciousness is more like a passing cloud. It appears, it is noticed, and then it shifts, moves, and disappears. There's no one holding on to it. There's no fixed point that needs to be present for it to be real. It's a movement, a process, happening in the moment, without the need for a self to define it. If you sit quietly and listen to your thoughts, you may notice they don't always come from a place of me. They arise, move through the mind, and then dissolve, like little ripples on the surface of water. There's no one to hold on to those thoughts. They come and they go, without needing a person to claim them. Imagine being fully present in a moment, watching the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun. There is no self to define this experience. There is just the experience itself, flowing naturally. You don't need a center to know that you are aware of the moment. The moment exists by itself, as pure awareness. In fact, this experience is often called selfless awareness. When we forget ourselves, even for a moment, we can see that consciousness isn't bound to the idea of a permanent self. It is simply there, aware of what is happening, without needing a self to label it or control it. It just is. This doesn't mean we stop experiencing the world. It doesn't mean we are unaware. Instead, it's the opposite. It suggests that awareness is something more vast, something without boundaries. It's not limited to a single point in time, or to a me who watches from the inside. It's something that simply exists all around in everything. The more we explore this idea, the more we realize that the self we cling to may just be a story we tell ourselves. It's a name, a shape, a history, but the experience of being aware doesn't need all that. It exists regardless of who we think we are. Awareness doesn't depend on an identity to be real. Take a moment to breathe deeply. Notice how the air moves in and out of your lungs. Is there a you controlling the breath, or is it simply happening? The act of breathing, like everything else, exists in the flow of experience. You don't need to identify with it. It simply is, moving through you, part of the larger seamless experience. And so in this sense, consciousness without a self becomes something quite freeing. Without a fixed me, there is no pressure to define or hold on to things. The world simply flows, experiences come and go, and there's no need to grasp or claim them. Everything is simply as it is, in its natural state. If there is no self, then there is no need to defend, protect, or assert that self. There's no me to be right or wrong, to be hurt or to need anything. This doesn't mean we are passive or detached. Instead, it means we are open, flowing with the experience, without the weight of a self to shape it. This idea of consciousness without a self asks us to rethink how we relate to the world. If we are not the center of experience, if we are not the me that holds it all together, then what are we? Maybe we are not separate from the world at all. Perhaps we are just part of the whole, experiencing being, without any need for a separate self. If you let go of the self, even for a moment, you might notice that awareness doesn't fade. It doesn't vanish, it just shifts, like a cloud in the sky, vast and open, free from the constraints we've placed on it. In that space there is no you, and yet there is all of the experience. It's a strange thing. This idea, we are so used to thinking of ourselves as the central piece of our experience. But what if the mind isn't centered on a single I? What if consciousness is simply a field of awareness, spread across time and space, without a need for an I to observe it? And yet the experience of being present in the world, of feeling the world, of seeing and hearing and knowing, it's real, isn't it? The illusion of a self doesn't take that away. It doesn't erase the richness of life. It just means that we don't need to cling to that sense of self in order to experience the world fully. So in a way, consciousness without a self is like stepping into a world without boundaries, without limits. It's not about losing ourselves, but about letting go of the need to define what we are. And in that letting go, we might find that we are simply part of everything, moving through life, experiencing being, without needing a self to hold it all together. There's a curious idea that consciousness, our sense of being aware, might not be as direct as we think. Imagine that, instead of being aware of the world around us, we are actually aware of our attention itself. What if consciousness is just a model our brain creates, a way of understanding what it is focusing on in the moment? This is the essence of the attention schema theory. According to this idea, we don't have direct access to consciousness itself. Instead, the brain creates a map, or schema, of where attention is directed, and that is what we experience as being aware. The sensation of I am conscious is not about raw experience, but a reflection of attention. The brain is constantly shifting its focus, deciding what to pay attention to, what to ignore. The attention schema theory suggests that consciousness is this map, the brain's model of what it's focusing on. It's like a spotlight, not on the world itself, but on the brain's understanding of where it is directing attention. Think of it this way: your attention moves around constantly, from one thought to the next, from the world outside to the feelings within. In each moment, the brain is updating its map, telling itself where attention is being placed. This map, or schema, is what we experience as consciousness. It's our brain's way of understanding itself. But here's where it gets interesting. This map, this model, is not a perfect reflection of reality. It's an approximation, a useful tool, but it doesn't capture everything. It's like looking at a map of a city. The map is helpful for understanding the layout, but it doesn't show every detail of what's happening on the streets. In the same way, the attention schema theory suggests that what we experience as consciousness is just a model, a simplified version of what's happening in the brain. We don't directly experience all of our mental processes. We only experience a small focused slice shaped by the attention the brain decides to highlight. Imagine watching a movie. You see only the parts that the director chooses to show you. The movie is full of moments happening off-screen, but you're not aware of them. In this analogy, consciousness is like that movie, a carefully constructed narrative created by the brain's attention. The parts you don't see are still there, but your awareness is focused on the parts that matter most. This theory also helps explain why we sometimes feel that our attention is scattered or distracted. If consciousness is just the brain's model of where attention is placed, then it's easy to see how things can get misdirected. Our awareness is always moving, always shifting, never fully present in any one moment. The brain is constantly updating its schema, trying to keep up with the flow of attention. If the attention schema theory is true, then consciousness might not be a singular thing, but a series of updates, shifts, and changes. Each moment, the brain adjusts its map, trying to create a picture of where attention is focused. What we experience as being conscious is simply the result of this constant updating process. But what does this say about the self that we experience in consciousness? If we are just aware of our attention, then where does the sense of I come from? The theory suggests that the sense of self is just another feature of this map. The brain places attention on certain thoughts, memories, and experiences, and that becomes our sense of who we are. In this view, consciousness isn't about a fixed inner self observing the world. It's more like a process, a moment-by-moment creation of a model that allows the brain to understand where attention is being placed. The I we experience is just a product of this model, a way the brain organizes and understands its own focus. The attention schema theory also helps explain why we don't always have a clear sense of awareness. If consciousness is just a model, then sometimes the brain's map can get confused. When we're tired, distracted, or overwhelmed, our sense of what we are focusing on becomes unclear, and with it, our sense of being conscious becomes fragmented. But there's a strange beauty in this idea. If consciousness is not some solid thing, but a flexible map created by the brain, then it opens up new possibilities. Perhaps consciousness is not something we have, but something we experience in each moment, an ongoing creation that shifts and adapts as we navigate the world. In some ways, this theory frees us from the need to find a permanent, unchanging self at the center of our experience. If consciousness is a model, a shifting schema, then maybe we don't need to hold on so tightly to the idea of a fixed I. We can simply experience the flow of attention, moment by moment, without needing to cling to an identity. The attention schema theory also invites us to reconsider how we understand reality. If what we experience as consciousness is just a model, then reality itself may not be as direct as we assume. We are not directly aware of the world. Instead, we are aware of the brain's model, of where attention is focused, a representation of reality, not reality itself. What if consciousness isn't about seeing the world, but about seeing our attention? What if the experience of being conscious is really the experience of tracking the flow of focus, like watching the spotlight move across a stage? The world in this view isn't something we directly experience. We only experience the map our brain creates. In this light, the attention schema theory doesn't just change how we think about consciousness, it changes how we think about the nature of experience itself. If consciousness is not about a self observing the world, but about a brain creating a model of attention, then everything we think we know about awareness may need to be rethought. So next time you find yourself lost in thought, or distracted, or caught up in the flow of attention, remember that what you're experiencing may not be what you think. Your mind is simply creating a map, a model, of where attention is focused, and what you experience as consciousness is just one small piece of that ever-shifting, ever-updating picture. There's a curious idea that our sense of self, the feeling of being you, might not be something solid, something permanent. Instead, it could be more like a story that the brain tells itself, a model that's constantly updated to make sense of the world and your place in it. This is the core of the self-model theory of subjectivity. The theory suggests that our experience of being someone, of having a self, is not an inherent truth of who we are, but a mental construct created by the brain to navigate the world. It's like a map that helps us understand our actions, emotions, and interactions, but it's not the territory itself. Think of the way you know your name. It's not something you experience directly. You don't see yourself in the mirror and think, "That's me." Instead, the brain creates a model of who you are, a name, a history, a personality, and that model shapes how you experience the world. It's the brain's way of understanding itself in relation to everything else. This model is constantly updated, just like a running story. As you experience life, the brain adjusts its story to match new information. If something happens that challenges the way you see yourself, your brain shifts its model to account for that change. You may not notice it happening, but it's always in motion, always adapting. But what does this mean for the idea of a permanent, stable self? If the self is just a model, then it's not fixed, it's fluid, adaptable, ever-changing. The I you experience today may be different from the I you experienced yesterday. This doesn't mean you're losing yourself, it means you're evolving, adjusting, growing, just as your brain adjusts its model. In a way, you are always becoming. There's no final version of you, no solid self that stays the same forever. Instead, you are a process, a continuous story that's written and rewritten by your brain, shaped by everything you experience and learn. This theory also sheds light on why we sometimes feel disconnected from ourselves. If the self is just a model, then it's possible for the model to be out of sync with our lived experience. When you feel confused, lost, or uncertain, it may be because the brain's model of who you are doesn't match what you're actually going through. But even in those moments, the model is still there, helping you make sense of the world. The brain is always trying to create a coherent story, even when things feel uncertain. And as new experiences unfold, the model updates itself to bring you back into alignment with your reality. The self-model theory also helps explain why we experience a sense of continuity in our lives. Even though the self is constantly changing, we still feel like we are the same person over time. This continuity comes from the brain's ability to maintain a stable model of who we are, even as we grow and change. This model also doesn't just apply to the past, it helps us predict our future as well. The brain's story of who we are shapes the decisions we make, the goals we set, and how we see our future. It's not just a passive reflection of the past, but a guide to where we're going. And yet the self is always incomplete. The brain can never fully capture who we are. There will always be parts of us that don't fit neatly into the model. But this doesn't mean the model is wrong. It's simply that we are too complex to be captured in a single story, a single idea of who we are. This theory suggests that the sense of self is not something we have, but something we experience. It's not a fixed entity, but a dynamic process that allows us to interact with the world in a meaningful way. The self is not something we find, it's something we create, moment by moment through the stories we tell ourselves. The brain's model of the self also helps explain why we often feel like we know ourselves so well. In reality, we are often only aware of the parts of the model that are active in the moment. Most of the self remains unconscious, running in the background, silently shaping our experiences without us ever fully realizing it. This model also helps explain why we can feel disconnected from others. If our sense of self is a model, then it's possible for that model to differ greatly from someone else's. The way you experience the world, the way you see yourself, may be completely different from how someone else experiences theirs. This can create distance, misunderstanding, and isolation, even when we share the same space. But there's beauty in this as well. If the self is a model, then it's not rigid, it's something that can be shaped, adjusted, and reimagined. We are not stuck with one version of ourselves. We can change, grow, and evolve, just as our brain constantly adapts its model to the world around us. So what does it mean to be you? If the self is just a model, it means you are not a static thing. You are an unfolding story, always being written, always in motion. The self you experience today may not be the same self you experience tomorrow, and that's okay. It's the beauty of being alive. The ability to constantly change, to adapt, to grow, and in that growth, we might just find that the most important thing is not the model itself, but the process of creating it. The story we tell ourselves is constantly evolving, but it's the act of telling it, of living it, that gives our lives meaning. There's a notion that your sense of you isn't quite what it seems. Imagine that the self you experience, the I you feel inside, isn't a fixed thing at all. Instead, it's more like a virtual character created by your brain, a construction that helps you interact with the world. This idea is called the virtual self theory. It suggests that the sense of self, the feeling that there is an I observing the world, is not a true, unchanging entity, but a model, a representation created by the brain. It's like the brain's version of a character in a video game, there to make sense of experience but not really real in itself. Think about it like this. In a video game, the character is controlled by the player, but the character itself isn't real. It's just an avatar on a screen, a creation that allows the player to navigate the game. Similarly, the brain creates the self as a model that allows us to navigate our lives, understand our place in the world, and make decisions. But here's the thing, just like in a game, the character seems real while you're playing. You feel the emotions, the thoughts, the actions of the character. But if you step back and think about it, the character is really just a construct, something the brain has created to make the experience feel real. So it is with the self. This virtual self isn't separate from the body or the mind. It's part of the larger process of interacting with the world. The brain uses this model of the self to help us process information, make decisions, and respond to our environment. It's like the software that runs in the background, making everything work smoothly, even though we don't often notice it. The more you think about it, the stranger it gets. What if the self you experience, the sense of being you, is just the brain's way of simplifying and organizing all the complexities of your thoughts, emotions, and actions? Instead of being a singular permanent entity, it's a model that the brain creates to help you make sense of who you are. Just like a virtual character in a game, the self is constantly being updated, adjusted, and shaped. It evolves over time based on the experiences you have. If something significant happens in your life, whether it's a change in how you see the world or a shift in your identity, the virtual self adjusts, updating its internal map to accommodate the new reality. This doesn't mean the self is unimportant or irrelevant. On the contrary, the virtual self is crucial for navigating life. It helps you understand who you are, what your goals are, and how you relate to others. It's the mental tool that the brain uses to interpret the world and guide your actions. But if the self is just a mental model, then what happens when the model breaks down? What happens when the brain's representation of who you are doesn't align with reality? Perhaps this is why people sometimes feel lost, disconnected, or unsure of themselves. The virtual self can get out of sync with the world, leading to confusion, doubt, and a sense of not knowing who we truly are. Still, there's a strange beauty in this idea. If the self is a construct, then it means we are not fixed, static beings. We are constantly changing, constantly adapting. The virtual self is like a story that's being written all the time, evolving as we move through life, responding to the new experiences and challenges we face. What's fascinating is that even though the virtual self is a mental construct, it feels completely real. We live with it every day, experiencing it as the I that shapes our thoughts, actions, and decisions. The self feels like the most solid thing in the world. And yet, according to this theory, it's simply a representation created by the brain to help us make sense of everything. In some ways, this makes consciousness even more mysterious. If the self is just a model, then what is the real you? Are you the brain that creates the virtual self, or are you the self, the I that experiences the world, even though it's not a permanent entity? The theory raises more questions than answers, leaving us with a deeper sense of wonder about the nature of being. And then there's the question of connection. If we're all walking around with virtual selves, mental representations of who we are, does that mean we're all just avatars, playing our parts in the game of life? Or is there something deeper, something that transcends the self, that connects us all in a way the virtual self can never capture? Even with these uncertainties, the virtual self theory invites us to rethink how we understand our own identity. If the self is a creation of the brain, constantly shifting, adjusting, evolving, then perhaps we can see it with more compassion. It's not a rigid, fixed thing. It's fluid, adaptable, a tool for navigating a complex world. This theory also suggests that we are more flexible than we think. We are not locked into one version of ourselves. We can change, we can grow, and the virtual self will adjust along the way. The process of becoming, of evolving, is at the heart of what it means to be human. So the next time you feel deeply connected to the you that you are, remember that it's not a permanent fixed thing. It's a model created by your brain, constantly updated, always shifting to keep you aligned with your world. You are not the avatar in your own game. You are the player, watching the story unfold. There's a strange notion that we as humans may have reached the limits of what we can understand about ourselves. We've peered deeply into the workings of the mind, explored every corner of perception and cognition, but when it comes to the experience of consciousness, there's a wall, a barrier we can't quite cross. This is called cognitive closure, the idea that certain problems, no matter how much we try, are beyond our grasp. Consciousness is one of those problems. No matter how many theories we create, how many neural pathways we trace, the true nature of subjective experience seems to remain elusive, locked behind a door we can't open. The hard problem of consciousness, as it's called, asks a simple yet profound question. Why does all this brain activity feel like something? Why does being aware feel like something at all? Why isn't consciousness just the sum of neural interactions? Why does it carry with it the rich, textured feeling of experience? When we consider how the brain processes information, it seems almost like a machine. Inputs come in, outputs go out. Yet when we turn our attention inward, we're faced with a strange puzzle. The brain does its work, yet we experience it, like watching a movie of our own thoughts. How does this internal cinema come to life? We've made great strides in understanding the brain's structure, how it processes information, and how it controls the body. But no matter how deeply we explore the mechanics of thought, the subjective feeling of being aware doesn't seem to fit into any neat box. It's like trying to explain the color red using only a list of wavelengths. It's not the same thing. In this way, cognitive closure makes sense. We are capable of understanding the brain's workings, but we may never truly understand why it feels the way it does to be us. The sensation of being alive and aware might simply be beyond our mental reach. Perhaps our brains are not equipped to answer this question. This idea suggests that consciousness, while real, may always be beyond the boundaries of full comprehension. The more we study, the more we uncover about the brain's processes. But the why of subjective experience, the what it's like to be conscious, could remain forever out of our grasp. It's like standing before a vast, beautiful landscape and knowing that no matter how hard you try, you'll never fully understand how the view feels. You can describe it, analyze it, even measure it, but the feeling of it, the emotional resonance of being there, is something that lies just outside the realm of explanation. But then there's a deeper question. Does this matter? Does it diminish the experience of being conscious if we can't explain it? The paradox is that, even though we can't fully grasp the nature of consciousness, we're still here, experiencing it in every moment. We live it, breathe it, feel it, even if we can't completely understand it. Some thinkers argue that we don't need an explanation to feel the wonder of consciousness. We can't explain everything, but that doesn't take away from the richness of experience. Even if we never fully grasp the why behind our awareness, the act of living with that awareness is what makes life meaningful. The hard problem asks why we have the rich inner experience of consciousness at all, but what if it's not a question that needs an answer? What if consciousness simply houses an inherent part of being alive, something that doesn't require explanation, only experience? Could it be that we are meant to live with the mystery, not solve it? Yet the human mind is endlessly curious, always seeking answers. The idea of cognitive closure suggests that we might be pushing against a boundary that is simply too vast to comprehend. In this way, the limits of our understanding could be just as important as what we do understand. They shape our view of the world and keep us searching, asking questions, moving forward. Even in the face of this cognitive closure, there's a beauty in the pursuit. We are in many ways explorers of the mind, venturing into territories where the map is incomplete. The fact that consciousness is something we can experience, even if we can never fully explain it, is part of what makes it so fascinating. And perhaps this is where the richness of life lies, not in the answers we find, but in the act of seeking them. The hard problem of consciousness keeps us moving, keeps us wondering. It propels us to look deeper, to ask and to reflect. And in that movement, we continue to live the mystery of being aware. So while cognitive closure may mean we can never fully solve the riddle of consciousness, it doesn't mean we stop experiencing it. The question itself becomes part of the journey, a thread woven through the fabric of our awareness. We might never know exactly why we are conscious, but we do know that in this moment we are. In the quiet spaces between thoughts, there is a question that echoes softly, asking us to look deeper. What if there is no self? What if the very sense of I that we carry with us from moment to moment is an illusion, a fleeting construct that doesn't truly exist? This question lies at the heart of many no-self theories, particularly in Buddhism. According to these teachings, the self is not a fixed, unchanging entity. It is not something permanent, something we can hold on to forever. Instead, it is a process, a pattern of thoughts, emotions, and experiences that constantly shift and change. Buddhism teaches that we are not a singular, independent self, but a collection of fleeting phenomena, thoughts, feelings, sensations that arise and pass away, like clouds drifting across the sky. The self we experience is simply the mind's way of organizing these patterns, giving them structure, but it's not the whole story. The idea is both simple and profound. We are not separate from the world. We are not isolated beings with a fixed, permanent essence. We are deeply interconnected with everything around us, constantly changing, flowing, evolving. The self is not a solid core, but a temporary collection of experiences and perceptions, constantly in motion. Imagine the way a river flows. The water is always moving, constantly changing, yet we still call it the river. But if you look closely, you'll see that no single drop of water ever stays the same. The river is made of many things, constantly shifting, and yet we call it one. This is like the self. According to Buddhist teachings, we cling to the idea of a fixed, permanent self because it feels comforting. We want to believe that there is something stable and unchanging inside of us, something that can withstand the ebb and flow of life. But the teachings suggest that this belief is the source of suffering. The more we cling to the idea of a stable self, the more we set ourselves up for disappointment. We chase after permanence in a world where everything is constantly changing. Our identities, our desires, our fears, they all shift over time, and when we try to hold on to them too tightly, we find ourselves struggling against the very nature of existence. Buddhism asks us to let go of the idea of the self as something fixed and separate. Instead, we are encouraged to see ourselves as part of a larger flow of life, a part of the web of interconnectedness that stretches out in all directions. When we release the need for a permanent self, we find freedom in the fluidity of being. This doesn't mean we cease to exist or that we lose our identity. It simply means we stop seeing ourselves as separate, unchanging entities. We begin to see that our identity is not a thing to be grasped, but a process, an ever-changing dance of experience, thought, and perception. The no-self concept is often misunderstood as suggesting that we don't matter, that we are insignificant. But it's the opposite. By letting go of the illusion of a permanent self, we open ourselves up to the richness of life. We become more attuned to the present moment, free from the burden of holding on to a fixed identity. When we let go of the idea that we are isolated, separate beings, we begin to feel a deeper sense of connection with everything around us. We are not separate from the world, but an integral part of it. The river and the water, the sky and the clouds, everything is interconnected, flowing together. This shift in perspective is not about erasing the self, but about seeing it more clearly. It's about recognizing that the self is a process, a pattern, a temporary construction that arises from the interplay of thoughts, sensations, and experiences. There is no unchanging I at the center of it all, just a dance of ever-shifting moments. When we embrace the no-self teachings, we begin to see the world in a new way. We stop looking for something solid to cling to and start experiencing life as it is, fluid, transient, beautiful in its impermanence. The fear of losing ourselves fades away because we realize there's nothing to lose. We are not something fixed, but part of a living, breathing flow. It's a gentle, liberating realization, We don't need to hold on to who we think we are. We don't need to protect a fragile sense of self. Instead, we can simply be in each moment, allowing life to unfold as it will, without the weight of a fixed identity to carry. This doesn't mean that we are without form. It simply means that we are not defined by a rigid concept of me. We are something more fluid, more open, more interconnected. We are both the river and the water, both the dance and the dancer, constantly moving, constantly shifting. Through the lens of no self, we can embrace the full spectrum of life, the joys, the sorrows, the changes, and the growth. We can experience everything deeply without the need to protect an unchanging core. We become more fully present, more fully alive, because we are no longer trapped by the illusion of permanence. And in this acceptance of impermanence, we find peace. The self is not something we need to grasp, to protect, to define. It is a process, a moment-to-moment unfolding that is part of a much larger whole. And in that, there is freedom. Freedom to simply be. What if the mind is not a single unified thing, but a collection, a bundle of different elements that come together, briefly forming the self? Imagine the mind not as one steady, unchanging essence, but as a group of experiences, thoughts, and feelings tied together for a moment before drifting apart. This is the heart of the bundle theory of mind. Instead of thinking of the mind as one consistent self, this theory suggests that the mind is made up of a collection of various components, thoughts, memories, emotions, that come together to create the illusion of a unified identity. But once you look closer, you see that there's no solid you behind it all. Picture your mind like a bundle of yarn, made up of many different threads. Each thread represents a different thought, a different emotion, a different experience. Alone, each thread is just a small part of the whole, but when they come together, they form the fabric of your mind, the you think you are. But as soon as one thread fades away, the bundle shifts. In this view, there's no core self at the center of your experiences. The mind doesn't have one permanent essence. Instead, it's a temporary arrangement of mental events, each one different from the last. The self you experience is just a brief collection, constantly changing, constantly shifting, like the threads of a bundle unraveling over time. Think about how memories work. They aren't fixed. They change as we grow, as we learn new things, and as we experience life differently. A memory from childhood may shift over time, influenced by new experiences or the way we've grown. It's not that the memory itself is unreliable, but rather that it's a piece of the bundle, always subject to change. The bundle theory suggests that our identity is just like that, a memory, a feeling, a thought, constantly rearranging itself. One moment we may feel like a confident person, the next, a nervous one. But in truth, neither of these identities is the whole story. They're just moments in a larger bundle of experiences that make up who we think we are. In this theory, there's no one stable, eternal self. What we call me is just a brief collection of thoughts and feelings that happens to be organized in a certain way for a moment. There's no permanent, unchanging essence at the center of it all. Instead, the self is like a temporary structure built from many different parts. But this doesn't mean the self is meaningless. The bundle as it forms creates the illusion of a coherent identity. It gives us a way to understand who we are, to navigate the world, and to interact with others. Without this collection of experiences, thoughts, and emotions, there would be no me to recognize. However, the more we look at it, the more we realize that our sense of self is not as solid as we think. It is fluid, shifting, temporary. The I that we experience is not a permanent fixed entity, but a collection that constantly adapts, a bundle of thoughts and feelings that come together and fall apart. Imagine that each day you experience new things. Some of those things change the way you think about yourself. Maybe you feel more confident after an accomplishment, or more uncertain after a failure. These changes reflect the shifting nature of the bundle, showing how your identity evolves based on your experiences. What if we are not meant to hold on to a fixed sense of self? What if the fluidity of our identity is what makes us human? We experience ourselves in one way one day and another way the next. The bundle theory reminds us that there is no single permanent self. There's just an ongoing collection of moments and experiences, ever changing. This perspective on identity can bring freedom. If there's no solid self to hold on to, then we are not bound by one version of ourselves. We can embrace the changes, the uncertainties, the shifts in who we are. The self we experience today may not be the same as the self we experience tomorrow, and that's okay. If our identity is just a bundle of experiences, then we are not confined to one idea of who we are. Each thought, each feeling, each experience is part of that bundle, but none of them define us completely. We are more than the sum of our parts, and yet we are made of all these parts, constantly shifting, constantly evolving. Think of it like a book. The chapters, the characters, the events, they all come together to create the story. But the story itself isn't one single thing. It's made up of all these parts, flowing together, shifting, changing, as the pages turn. In the same way, we are a story, a narrative made up of fleeting moments. The bundle theory also suggests that there is no essential me to find. We aren't searching for a fixed, unchanging core. Instead, we are simply experiencing life, moment by moment, each moment contributing to the story of who we are. It's not about finding the real self, but accepting that the self is always unfolding. So we begin to realize that identity is not something we need to protect or defend. We don't need to hold on to the idea of who we are. Instead, we can let go and allow the bundle to change, to grow, to evolve. And in that freedom, we discover a deeper sense of connection to life itself. This idea may challenge how we see ourselves, but it also frees us from the pressure of having to be something fixed and permanent. We are simply a collection of thoughts, experiences, and feelings coming together in the moment. And in each moment we have the chance to be something new, something different, something more. As we let go of the need for a solid, unchanging self, we can embrace the fluidity of being. We are not bound by a past version of ourselves, nor do we need to cling to a future one. We are always changing, always becoming, and that in itself is the beauty of who we are. What if the self you experience is not just yours? What if there is no singular I at all, but a kind of shared experience, a collective awareness? Instead of one mind observing the world, what if there are many, all blending together in a single stream of consciousness? This is the essence of first-person pluralism, a theory that suggests consciousness is not an individual phenomenon, but a shared one. Instead of each of us having our own isolated, independent experience of the world, we are all part of a larger, interconnected field of awareness. We are not separate beings, but part of a collective. Imagine the way a choir sings. Each voice is distinct, but together they create a single unified sound. In the same way, first-person pluralism suggests that our individual experiences are like the different notes of a song, coming together to form a harmonious shared consciousness. We are not isolated in our own minds, but part of a greater whole. This idea challenges the conventional belief that consciousness belongs to each individual. Instead, it proposes that our awareness is not only personal but communal. The I that we experience is not the only one present, it's just one voice in a larger chorus of consciousness. We are not alone in our awareness, we share it with others. Think about how we often feel connected to others. Whether it's a deep conversation with a friend or a shared experience in a crowd, there's a sense of merging, of being part of something larger. First-person pluralism suggests that this feeling of connection is not just emotional but fundamental. Our consciousness is not confined to our own minds, it stretches out, linking us to others. In this view, consciousness is not a solitary event. It's a shared experience, constantly overlapping, intertwining, and blending. Each individual perspective is part of a greater collective awareness, shaping and being shaped by the others. There's no separate self standing apart, but a flow of awareness that includes everyone. This theory invites us to rethink the very nature of identity. If consciousness is shared, then who are we? Are we just isolated minds, living in separate worlds? or are we something more? Are we, in fact, the collective, the sum of all these interwoven experiences and perspectives? The more we embrace this idea, the more we begin to see that we are not as separate as we think. Our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are not just ours, they are part of a larger tapestry, a shared experience that connects us to others in ways we may not fully understand. We are not alone in our minds, but what about the sense of I that feels so real to us? It's there, isn't it? That feeling of being me, of having a distinct consciousness, separate from everyone else. First-person pluralism suggests that this sense of individual identity is not false but incomplete. It's part of a greater story, a shared experience, but it's not the whole story. We often think of consciousness as a solitary experience. We feel as if we are in our own minds, observing the world from behind our eyes, apart from everyone else. But what if that sense of separation is an illusion? What if the boundaries between me and you are not as solid as they seem? If we begin to see consciousness as a shared experience, we can start to recognize how interconnected we really are. The thoughts we have are not just ours, they are part of a greater flow of awareness, a stream that includes everyone. We are not isolated in our minds, but part of something much larger, something that transcends individuality. This doesn't mean we lose our sense of self. Rather, it suggests that our sense of self is more fluid, more connected to others than we realize. The boundaries we draw between ourselves and others are not as rigid as we often think. Our consciousness is a collective, a shared space where our individual experiences come together. In this light, the experience of being aware becomes something more beautiful, more expansive. Instead of seeing ourselves as isolated islands, we begin to see that we are part of an ocean, connected to everyone else, sharing in the flow of awareness that makes up the world. Our experience is not only our own, it is shared, woven together with others. Perhaps this is what it means to be human, to be part of a greater consciousness, a flow of awareness that connects us all. We are not separate, but one. Our experiences, thoughts, and feelings are not just ours, they are part of a greater whole, a shared awareness that transcends individuality. And so, we are invited to see the world in a new way. Instead of focusing solely on our own individual consciousness, we begin to recognize the interconnectedness of all minds. Our experience is not isolated, it is part of a larger, shared consciousness that unites us all. We are not alone in our awareness, we are part of something much greater. This perspective allows us to embrace the beauty of connection, to see ourselves not as separate individuals, but as part of a larger flow of consciousness. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are not isolated, they are part of a shared tapestry, woven together by the collective awareness that unites us all. There is a quiet layer to our awareness, a subtle reflection of the mind itself. It's not simply that we are aware of the world, but that we are aware that we are aware. We notice our thoughts, recognize them, and often reflect on them, not just experience them. This is the essence of metacognition. Metacognitive theories of awareness suggest that our consciousness is not just about experiencing the world, but also about observing and understanding our own mental processes. We do not simply think, we think about thinking, feel about feeling, and know about knowing. This deeper layer of awareness adds a complexity to our experience. Imagine you are reading a book. Not only are you aware of the words on the page, but you are also aware of the process of reading itself. You recognize how your mind is making sense of the words, how thoughts form and shift as you read. This awareness of the process is metacognition in action. This idea suggests that consciousness is not a single simple experience. It's layered. It's like having an inner dialogue with yourself. You don't just respond to the world, you also reflect on how you are responding. You become aware of your own responses, judgments, and thoughts, adding a dimension to the flow of experience. Metacognitive awareness is the mind observing itself. It's the ability to step back and consider the nature of your thoughts, your emotions, and your understanding. This self-reflection is what allows us to improve, to adapt, and to learn. Without this awareness, we would be at the mercy of our immediate reactions, without insight into why we act the way we do. In some ways, this gives us a kind of distance from ourselves. We are no longer just swept away by the flow of thoughts and experiences. We can step outside of them for a moment and examine them, noticing patterns, making judgments, and recognizing the sources of our feelings. We become more than just the sum of our parts, but it's not always easy. This metacognitive layer of awareness can sometimes be subtle, even elusive. We may be caught up in a thought or emotion so fully that we lose sight of the fact that we are even experiencing it. Yet, in moments of clarity, we see the vast landscape of the mind, a space where reflection and awareness flow together. Think of how we often question our actions. Why did I do that? Why did I feel that way? These questions are metacognitive in nature. They represent our attempt to understand not just what we are experiencing, but why and how we are experiencing it. This extra layer of awareness allows us to make sense of our own complexity. Through metacognition, we start to realize that we are not passive observers of our thoughts. We actively shape and refine them. The process of thinking itself becomes part of the experience. We do not just process information, we actively manage the process, becoming aware of how we process, filter, and evaluate information. But what happens when metacognitive awareness goes awry? When we become overly aware of our thoughts or feelings, when we second-guess ourselves too much, or become lost in self-reflection. This is where things can become complicated. Too much metacognition can sometimes lead to overthinking, anxiety, or self-doubt. The very process of reflection, when not balanced, can spiral inward. Yet even when it feels overwhelming, metacognitive awareness plays a crucial role in growth. It allows us to learn from our experiences, to adjust, and to shift how we approach situations. When we observe our own thoughts and feelings, we can make informed choices about how to respond, how to change, and how to grow. Metacognitive awareness also helps us navigate the world around us. It's not just about understanding our inner workings, it's about understanding how those workings relate to the world. When we step back and examine our responses to external events, we gain insight into how we engage with the world, how we filter and interpret information. In this way, consciousness is not just a passive experience, it is active, layered, reflective. We are both the observer and the observed, both the experiencer and the reflector. This dual role allows us to see the world not only from our immediate senses, but also from a broader, more self-aware perspective. The beauty of metacognitive awareness is that it offers us a deeper connection with ourselves. It's not just about thinking or feeling, it's about understanding those thoughts and feelings. It's about noticing the way we engage with the world and becoming more intentional in how we respond to it. As we practice metacognition, we become more adept at noticing the patterns in our thinking, more skilled at stepping back and examining the flow of our mental processes. We learn to observe without judgment, to understand without rushing to conclusions. We create a space for thoughtful reflection where clarity can emerge. This process also helps us recognize the limits of our own thinking. Just as we can see patterns in our thoughts, we also see where our understanding ends, where assumptions may take over, and where biases may color our view. Metacognition helps us become more mindful, more aware of our mental boundaries. And in this awareness, there is freedom. When we see how our mind works, when we notice the patterns of our thinking, we gain a sense of control. We are not slaves to our thoughts, we are the stewards of them. We can choose to shift, to change, to redirect the flow of our awareness. Ultimately, metacognitive theories of awareness remind us that consciousness is not a simple, passive experience. It's a rich, layered process, one that is constantly shifting, evolving, and reflecting upon itself. We are not merely experiencing the world, we are actively participating in the creation of our experience, watching and understanding as we go. There is a curious paradox at the heart of our experience of being aware. We know without a doubt that we are conscious. We feel the richness of sensation, the depth of thought, the texture of emotions, and yet in this experience, we often find ourselves unaware of much of what happens in our own minds. This is the essence of phenomenal consciousness without access. The idea suggests that while we experience consciousness, we may not have full access to it. We live in a world of rich, vivid awareness, but much of that awareness remains hidden, like a tapestry we can feel but not fully see. Phenomenal consciousness is the raw, lived experience of being aware. It's the sensation of seeing the color red, hearing music, feeling the warmth of the sun. It's what it feels like to be alive, to have a first-person perspective on the world. This is the richness of experience that we all share. But what happens when we cannot access the full scope of our own consciousness? We might experience a deep sense of knowing, but we cannot always articulate or access what exactly we are experiencing. Our minds may be processing complex thoughts and emotions, but we cannot always reach into those thoughts to understand them fully. In this sense, there is a gap between the experience of being conscious and our ability to reflect on that experience. We know we are aware, but we may not always have access to the processes that give rise to our awareness. It's like listening to a symphony while being aware of the music, but not being able to identify the instruments playing it. The phenomenon is subtle but profound. Think about your dreams. You may wake up with a feeling of having experienced something vivid, something full of meaning, but when you try to recall the details, they slip away. The experience was there, but the access to it, once it has passed, is limited. This limitation doesn't mean the experience is any less real. It just means that our awareness is not always available for us to observe directly. Phenomenal consciousness is a state of being, a rich and immediate experience, but our ability to step back and reflect on that experience is not always available. In some ways, this lack of access to our own consciousness is part of what makes us human. We are constantly living in a flow of experiences, much of which we are not fully aware of. Our minds are constantly processing information, creating thoughts, forming perceptions, yet we are often unaware of the depth and complexity of this inner world. We may think that we fully understand our thoughts and feelings, but much of our experience remains just out of reach. We know we are thinking, we know we are feeling, but the true nature of those thoughts and feelings can be elusive. It's as if there is a veil between our experience and our understanding of it. This veil creates a curious distance between us and the experience of being conscious. We are aware, and yet we cannot always access all that we are aware of. There is an untapped richness to our experience, one that we may not always be able to bring into the light of our conscious reflection. At times we might sense that there is more going on in our minds than we can grasp. We feel a deep, unspoken truth, but cannot find the words for it. The experience is there, vivid and real, but it remains partly hidden, locked away in the depths of our awareness, just out of our reach. This concept challenges our understanding of what it means to be conscious. We are not fully in control of our awareness. We may be experiencing something profound, but the ability to reflect on it is limited. We live in the richness of experience, but the ability to navigate that richness with full clarity is often beyond us. Consider the way we experience a moment of intense emotion. In the moment we feel everything deeply, but when we try to reflect on it later, the feeling doesn't always translate. We know we felt something, but the depth of that feeling is often hard to access or describe. The experience is locked within, unable to be fully unpacked. In some ways, this creates a kind of mystery at the heart of our awareness. We know we are conscious, but we cannot always access the full scope of our consciousness. There is a gap between being aware and being able to reflect on that awareness. The experience is real, but the understanding of it may remain distant. This gap also invites curiosity. If we cannot fully access our consciousness, what does that say about the nature of the mind? Are there parts of ourselves that we are never fully aware of? Are there depths to our experience that remain hidden, beyond our understanding? These questions leave us pondering the limits of our own awareness. Perhaps this mystery is not something to solve, but something to live with. We are conscious, and we experience the world in rich, vivid ways, but the full scope of that experience may always remain just out of reach. In that very mystery, there is a kind of beauty, a reminder that consciousness, in its fullness, is something vast, something beyond us. The experience of phenomenal consciousness without access reminds us that our minds are more intricate than we often realize. There is always more going on beneath the surface than we can understand. And perhaps in that understanding of our limitations, we can find a deeper appreciation for the complexity of being aware. There's a moment, a quiet pause, when you start to wonder who is the one wondering. It's like a small loop opening up within itself, a question nested inside another question. You ask yourself who you are, but as you look, you realize you're looking through a lens of your own making, a reflection of a reflection. This is the feeling behind recursive self-reference collapse. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, watching your reflection. Now, imagine the reflection looking back at you, seeing it. What happens when the mirror starts to reflect itself, endlessly, trapping the image in an infinite loop? This is the recursive loop, and it can lead to something that feels like collapse. You begin with a simple question, who am I? But as you try to answer it, the question itself starts to blur. Every answer you offer seems to reflect back on the question, as if the self you are searching for is constantly slipping away, just beyond reach. The more you reflect, the more distant the answer seems. At some point, the loop becomes so complex that it begins to collapse inward. The more you search for the I that is asking, the more you lose sight of it. It's like looking for a point on a map, only to realize the map keeps folding in on itself, erasing the path you thought was clear. The question starts to spiral, and with each turn, the answer becomes harder to grasp. This is where the recursive self-reference begins to collapse, the concept of the self itself. Each time you look inward, you find another layer, another reflection, until you no longer know where the self ends and the questions begin. It's a kind of mental paradox, where seeking the truth about yourself only makes the truth seem more elusive. In the moment of this collapse, you are caught in a state of awareness that is not quite awareness, not quite confusion, but somewhere in between. You are aware that you are aware, but the boundaries of that awareness keep shifting. It's as if the self you are seeking is not a stable thing, but a fluid, ever-changing presence caught in a web of self-reflection. This feeling is unsettling yet profound. It asks you to step back from the simple question of who am I, and to consider that the I might not be a fixed, permanent thing at all. Instead, the self you know may be nothing more than a constantly shifting process, a flow of reflections within reflections. What if the very act of thinking about the self, of asking questions about who you are, is part of the collapse itself? What if the more you try to pin down the self, the more it escapes? This is where the collapse occurs. The boundaries between self-awareness and self-doubt begin to blur, and the experience of being you begins to unravel in strange, complex ways. The recursive self-reference collapse also hints at a deeper question about consciousness. If the mind is always reflecting on itself, always thinking about thinking, is there any true solid self at all? Or is the self simply the result of this endless reflection, a temporary arrangement of thoughts and awareness that constantly shifts and changes? This collapse is a moment of insight and mystery. It's not a breakdown of the mind, but rather a deepening of the experience of being. The more you look for the self, the more you realize that there is nothing to find. It's not lost. It's never been there in the way you thought. The self is not something to possess. It's something to experience. The experience itself is a fluid, shifting process, like the dance of shadows at dusk. The more you chase the reflection of your own mind, the further it moves. The collapse happens when the mind realizes it can never fully grasp its own nature, and in that realization, the search itself becomes part of the experience. You see, in this collapse, there is a strange freedom. The pressure to find a concrete self begins to fade. You can stop looking for something stable and permanent, and instead embrace the fluidity of experience. You are not a fixed identity. You are the process, the flow, the questioning, the awareness itself. This insight opens up a new way of understanding who we are. Instead of seeing the self as something to hold on to, we begin to see it as something to let go of. The self is not a thing, but a process, constantly shifting, constantly reflecting, always changing. In the collapse, there is liberation from the need for stability. The more we reflect on the collapse, the more we begin to understand that this fluidity is not a loss, but a gift. We are not confined to one idea of who we are. We can change, adapt, and flow, free from the rigid boundaries of a fixed self. The collapse becomes an opening, a space for new possibilities. This process of recursive self-reference collapse asks us to let go of the need for a solid, permanent self. It invites us to step into the mystery of experience, where we are not defined by one idea or one moment. Instead, we are the unfolding process, the continuous questioning, the awareness that shifts and grows. In this space of collapse, we come to see that consciousness is not about finding an answer, but about living the questions. The more we seek, the more we uncover. The self is not a thing to be found, but a journey to be experienced, a process to be lived, an unfolding mystery that we are both part of and witness to. Imagine sitting in a darkened theater watching a movie unfold on the screen in front of you. The images are vivid, the story is captivating, and the experience feels real, as though you are right there inside the film. But then a thought crosses your mind. Asterisk, who is watching this movie? Asterisk. This is the essence of the Cartesian theater, an idea proposed by philosopher Dennett to describe how we often imagine our own consciousness. We picture ourselves as sitting in a mental theater, where a homunculus, a little person, sits at the center, watching all of our thoughts, sensations, and perceptions unfold, as though the mind itself were like a screen, and the self was watching it. For centuries, this idea of an inner observer, watching everything that happens inside the mind, has been a tempting image. It's the picture of consciousness as something separate from the body, a little person inside your head who experiences your world. The body acts as a sort of vessel, but the real you is the one watching from the inside, detached, aware of everything happening around you. But this view of consciousness is a myth. There is no inner observer sitting in the theater, watching a mental movie of the world. Instead, consciousness is much more complex, much less isolated than we often imagine. The self is not some internal homunculus observing the mind from within, but part of the very process of perception itself, always intertwined with the body and the world. In reality, what we call consciousness doesn't need a little person inside our minds. It's a process, a dynamic, ongoing interaction between the brain, the senses, and the world. There is no fixed point from which we view our thoughts. Instead, awareness arises from the flow of experiences shaped by everything we perceive, think, and feel. The Cartesian theater gives us a comforting image of a stable, controlled center of awareness, something we can rely on to experience life. But when we imagine a self sitting in the theater, we ignore the fact that the self is not separate from the experiences it has. The self is part of the experience, woven into the very fabric of perception and action. Consider this: when you see something, there is no separate part of you that watches the experience unfold. The perception is not like a movie on a screen that you observe from a distance. Instead, the perception happens inside your mind, shaped by the senses, the body, and the environment, all working together in real time. There's no viewing screen where everything is projected for your conscious mind to observe. Awareness is not something that is simply received passively, like watching a film. It is something actively created in each moment, a result of the brain processing information from the world and from within itself. You are part of the process, not a spectator of it. The Cartesian theater, in essence, gives us a false picture of how the mind works. It separates the self from the experience of being conscious, when in fact the self is just another part of the experience. There is no detached observer, no little person watching from inside. The mind is not a passive screen, it is an active participant in what it perceives. This myth also creates a divide between the mind and the body, suggesting that consciousness exists apart from our physical experience, but in reality, consciousness is intimately tied to the brain and the body. Our awareness is deeply embedded in the physical processes of the mind, and it is shaped by everything we do, think, and feel. The more we embrace the idea that there is no Cartesian theater inside our minds, the more we realize that consciousness is not a single, isolated thing. It is a fluid, interactive process, always unfolding, always responding to the world around us. We are not passive observers of our thoughts, we are active participants in the experience of being aware. By letting go of the idea of a separate observer inside the mind, we also begin to see the interconnectedness of all things. Consciousness is not something that happens to us, it is something we are a part of. It is not separate from the world, but deeply integrated into it. The mind is not a theater, it is a living process, constantly in motion, always in dialogue with the body and the environment. This shift in perspective can feel unsettling, but it also opens up new ways of understanding what it means to be conscious. If there is no inner observer, no self-watching from a distance, then perhaps the very idea of a fixed, stable self is also an illusion. The self is not a spectator, it is part of the unfolding, constantly changing process of consciousness. In this sense, consciousness is not something we have or possess, it is something we live, something that arises from the flow of experience, from the interplay between the brain, the body, and the world. We are not separate from our awareness, we are intimately connected to it, part of the process of perceiving and being. By rejecting the myth of the Cartesian theater, we begin to see that consciousness is not a spectator sport. It is an active embodied process, shaped by everything we experience and everything we are. There is no separate self watching the show, there is only the experience, the awareness, the being. This shift in understanding can be liberating. It frees us from the need to separate the mind from the body, from the need to create a stable, fixed identity that sits apart from experience. Instead, we can embrace the fluidity of being, knowing that consciousness is not something we look at from a distance, but something we are deeply immersed in. There's a story about a man who, while walking through a forest, stops to admire a tree. As he gazes at its bark, its leaves, its twisting branches, a strange thought arises in his mind. What if the tree is conscious? Not in the way we think of consciousness, not as a mind with thoughts or feelings, but in some deeper, more intrinsic way. This thought leads him to a strange idea. What if everything is conscious? Not just humans or animals, but rocks, rivers, the very air we breathe. This is the essence of Panpsychism, a philosophy suggesting that consciousness is not exclusive to human beings, but exists in everything, everywhere, even in the tiniest particles of matter. But there's a twist. What if there's no subject experiencing this consciousness? Typically, we think of consciousness as something that belongs to a subject, a self that is aware of its experiences. But Panpsychism without a subject challenges this idea. What if everything has consciousness, but there is no someone inside it to experience it? The tree, the rock, the river, all conscious, yet without an observer. Imagine this: the river flows, the tree sways in the wind, the rock sits in silence. Panpsychism suggests that in some sense all of these things have consciousness, a kind of awareness, but this awareness doesn't belong to anything or anyone. It simply exists as part of the world, in the material itself, without a subject who can perceive it. What does it mean for something to be conscious without a subject? It's a difficult idea to grasp because we are so used to thinking of consciousness as tied to an individual, a me, who is experiencing the world. But if consciousness is everywhere, without a subject to witness it, then what is the nature of that experience? Perhaps it is not an experience at all, in the way we understand it. Maybe it's not about knowing or perceiving, but about being, a simple fundamental aspect of existence. Just as the tree grows, the river flows, and the rock rests, there is an awareness that simply is without needing a self to witness it. This perspective asks us to step away from the usual way we think about consciousness. Instead of seeing it as something tied to an individual mind, we are asked to consider it as a quality of matter itself. Just as a rock is hard and a leaf is green, consciousness is a characteristic of the world, woven into the very fabric of reality, not requiring a subject to experience it. This doesn't mean the tree or the rock is aware in the same way we are. They don't have thoughts, emotions, or experiences in the way humans do. But the idea of panpsychism without a subject suggests that there is a kind of primitive awareness that is part of everything. It's not consciousness as we experience it, but something more basic, more fundamental, like a pulse running through the universe. The tree may not know it's a tree, and the river may not know it's flowing, but in this view there's still an awareness, a fundamental presence of consciousness within them, a quality that pervades all things. It's like the world is alive, not with minds, but with a quiet, pervasive awareness that doesn't need a subject to hold it. This can be a challenging idea, as we are so used to thinking of consciousness as something individual. We are the ones who are aware. We are the ones who reflect on the world, but panpsychism without a subject asks us to rethink that. It suggests that awareness is not something that belongs to a subject, but rather a quality of existence itself. In this view, consciousness is not something that comes into being when a subject begins to perceive. It is there, always in everything, even in the absence of a mind to experience it. It is not tied to perception or thought. It is simply a fundamental aspect of the universe, like space or time, part of the fabric that makes up reality. Think of it like the air. We don't see the air, but we know it's there. It's all around us, filling every space, moving through everything. Similarly, consciousness, according to this theory, is everywhere, in everything. It doesn't need a subject to observe it, because it is not about perception. It is about being, about existence itself. This perspective invites us to expand our understanding of consciousness. It's not just about being aware of things in the world. It's about recognizing that awareness itself is a fundamental property of the world. Just as everything has mass, everything has this awareness, a silent, subtle presence woven into the very essence of being. But if consciousness exists without a subject, how do we understand it? How do we relate to something that is not ours, something that has no experiencer? This question is difficult to answer, as it challenges the core of what we think we know about awareness. It asks us to let go of the need for a subject and simply accept that awareness exists without needing to be observed. This shift in perspective can change how we see the world. It allows us to imagine that consciousness is not something we own, but something that is. It flows through everything, from the smallest grain of sand to the grandest mountain. We are not the only ones with awareness. It is a quality that extends beyond us, part of the greater whole of existence. In the end, panpsychism without a subject asks us to rethink what consciousness really is. It's not a simple thing that belongs to a single observer. It is woven into the very fabric of the universe, present in everything, whether or not there is someone to witness it. Consciousness, in this sense, is not ours to own. It is a fundamental aspect of being, quietly existing in everything. There is a story about a young girl who, after hours of watching the world around her, asks a simple question, what makes me aware of all of this? She watches the leaves sway, the birds fly by, the people talk. There's a moment when she realizes it's not just that she sees these things, but that she knows she's seeing them. This realization opens a door in her mind. If she is aware of these things, what is it that makes her aware? The girl wonders, what is the part of her that holds all these experiences together? What gives rise to the very feeling of being conscious? And in her wonder, she stumbles upon an idea, a theory called Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. IIT suggests that consciousness arises from the way information is integrated within a system. Imagine a network of lights, each one shining in its own direction. These lights are like individual pieces of information. When they come together in certain patterns, they form a unified whole. This unity, according to IIT, is what gives rise to consciousness. In this view, consciousness is not just about the information itself, but about how that information is organized. It's not enough for a system to process data. It must also be able to integrate that data in a way that creates a whole unified experience. This integration is the key to what it means to be conscious, to experience the world in a connected, meaningful way. Think of your mind as a vast network. Each thought, each sensation, each perception is a piece of information. But for consciousness to arise, these pieces must come together, like a symphony, where every note plays its part. The individual pieces of information must work in harmony to create the experience of being aware. The brilliance of IIT is that it moves away from the idea that consciousness is tied to a single location or a single entity. Instead, it suggests that consciousness is an emergent property of a system, the result of how information is shared and integrated across different parts. The more integrated the information, the richer the experience of consciousness. Take the brain, for example. It's made up of billions of neurons, each one processing information. But the neurons don't work in isolation. They interact, they communicate, they form networks. It's this intricate web of connections and interactions that creates consciousness. Without this integration, there would be no awareness, just isolated fragments of information. In this theory, consciousness is not something that exists in one place. It is a product of the interactions and connections between different elements of a system. Just as a piece of music is made up of individual notes, but only becomes music when those notes are played together, consciousness arises from the integration of information across the mind. IIT also proposes something fascinating. It suggests that consciousness can be measured. If we can quantify how much information is integrated within a system, we might be able to determine the level of consciousness present. A system with more integrated information would have a richer, more complex consciousness, while a system with less integration would have a simpler form of awareness. Imagine a computer. If it processes information in a simple linear way, it might be able to perform basic tasks, but it won't have any sense of awareness. However, if the computer were able to integrate information in complex ways, it might begin to show signs of consciousness. The more integrated the information, the closer the system comes to resembling the rich, dynamic experience of human consciousness. This idea invites us to think about consciousness not as a fixed thing, but as a spectrum, a range of possibilities. The more complex and integrated the system, the more profound the experience of consciousness. We are not simply conscious or not conscious. Our awareness exists on a scale, shaped by the degree of integration within the system. The beauty of IIT is that it explains consciousness in a way that isn't limited to humans or animals. It suggests that any system capable of integrating information could have some form of consciousness, even if it's not like ours. This means that consciousness could exist in different forms, from the mind of a human to the networks of information within a machine, or even the flow of information in the natural world. But there are still mysteries within IIT. While the theory explains how consciousness arises from integrated information, it doesn't explain why this happens. Why does integrated information give rise to the subjective experience of awareness? What is it about the integration that makes us feel conscious rather than simply processing data? This is the great unknown, the part of consciousness that still eludes our understanding. Still, IIT offers a new way of looking at consciousness. Instead of seeing it as a separate, isolated phenomenon, it suggests that consciousness is a fundamental property of complex systems. It is the result of how information comes together, how different parts work in harmony to create the unified experience we call awareness. And so, as the girl in the story continues to wonder, she realizes that consciousness is not a single entity, but a dance of interconnected parts, each playing its role in the creation of awareness. It's not about one thing being conscious, but about the harmony that emerges when many things come together in a single integrated experience. And in that realization, she sees that consciousness is not just about being aware, but about how that awareness comes to life. There's a story about a school of fish, swimming in perfect harmony. Each fish moves independently, yet they all follow the same fluid pattern, creating a beautiful synchronized dance. The fascinating part is that no single fish is controlling the group. Instead, the pattern emerges from their collective movement. In this dance, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This idea of consciousness as an emergent property works much the same way. It suggests that consciousness doesn't come from a single part of the brain, but from the interactions between all of its parts. Just as the school of fish creates a beautiful whole without a single leader, consciousness arises from the complex interactions of countless neural processes, none of which are conscious on their own. At first glance, it's hard to imagine how something as rich and vivid as consciousness can emerge from simple interactions, but that's the heart of the emergent property idea. The brain is made up of billions of cells, each doing its own job, yet when they work together, they create something far more intricate and complex: awareness itself. Emergence is a kind of magic in the way it appears in nature. Take a flock of birds. Each bird follows a simple rule: it must stay close to its neighbors, but when they all follow this rule, they create complex patterns in the sky. No single bird is aware of the larger pattern, yet together they create something beautiful and coordinated. In the same way, consciousness is not controlled by any one neuron or group of neurons. Instead, it arises from the collective interaction of all the brain's components. Each neuron is like a small part of a larger whole, each contributing to the overall experience of being aware, but none of them are conscious by themselves. The concept of emergence helps us see that consciousness is not a simple thing. It's a process that emerges from the interactions of countless smaller processes. It's like looking at a painting. The individual strokes of the brush seem simple, but when placed together, they create a complex image. The painting isn't just a sum of its parts, it's a new creation that wouldn't exist without the whole. Emergence also explains why consciousness feels so unified. Even though it arises from many different processes, we experience it as a single unified thing. Just like the school of fish that appears as one entity, consciousness feels like a singular experience. Yet it's made up of countless interactions, many of which are happening out of our awareness. In a way, this makes consciousness more like a river than a solid object. The water flows, moving in many directions, but it's all part of the same current. The river's flow emerges from the interaction of countless water molecules, just as consciousness emerges from the interactions of countless neural processes. The flow doesn't belong to any one molecule, but it is created by all of them working together. The idea of consciousness as an emergent property also challenges the notion that consciousness is something we can isolate and pinpoint in the brain. We might look at one area of the brain and say, this is where consciousness comes from, but in reality, it's not confined to any single part. It's the result of the entire system working together, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. This understanding of consciousness invites us to see it not as something we have, but as something we do. It's not a static object inside our heads, but a dynamic process that emerges from the interactions of all the parts of our brain. We are not passive recipients of consciousness, we are active participants in its creation. At the heart of the emergent view of consciousness is the idea that it arises spontaneously from complexity. Just as the school of fish creates a beautiful pattern without a leader, consciousness emerges from the complex dynamic interactions of the brain's many parts. It's a natural byproduct of a highly organized, interconnected system. This also suggests that consciousness might be more common than we think. If it arises from complex systems, then any system that reaches a certain level of complexity could have some form of consciousness, even if it's not like ours. A flock of birds, a group of ants, or even a complex machine could potentially have forms of awareness, depending on how their parts interact. The beauty of this idea is that it doesn't require a central controller, a self sitting at the top of the brain, managing everything. Instead, consciousness emerges from the bottom up, arising from the interactions of simple processes. It's a process that happens naturally when the right conditions are met. This view also brings a sense of wonder to our understanding of consciousness. It's not something magical or mysterious, but something that emerges from the basic principles of organization and complexity. Consciousness is not a single isolated entity. It's a dynamic process that flows from the interconnectedness of the mind. By thinking of consciousness as an emergent property, we start to see it as a part of the natural world. It's not a special thing that only humans have, but a phenomenon that arises from the interactions of complex systems. In this view, consciousness is part of the flow of life, part of the intricate dance of the universe, and so consciousness is not something fixed, something we possess. It's something that emerges from the rich complexity of our minds, a product of the interaction between all the parts that make us who we are. Just as the school of fish moves together in harmony, consciousness emerges from the interplay of countless neural processes. I was sitting by the window, watching the world outside. The way the leaves fluttered in the breeze caught my attention. I thought, how do I know that I'm thinking about the leaves? It was a simple question, but as soon as I asked it, I realized that I was aware of both the leaves and my own thoughts about them at the same time. It was as if my mind was reflecting on itself, while still being fully immersed in the world outside. This moment of reflection, where I was both observing and aware of my own observation, made me think about a theory called the Reentry principle, proposed by neuroscientist Gerald Edelman. The principle suggests that consciousness is not a one-way process, but rather a continuous loop of feedback and reflection, where the mind is constantly re-entering itself, creating an ongoing flow of awareness. The reentry principle suggests that consciousness arises from the constant communication and feedback loops between different parts of the brain. It's not just that we perceive the world, we constantly process and reflect upon our perceptions, creating a dynamic, ongoing cycle. In other words, the mind is always looping back on itself, revisiting and revising the information it gathers. Imagine a feedback loop, like the way sound echoes back in a large hall. At first, there's just the sound of a voice, but as the sound bounces back and forth, it becomes more complex, richer, more layered. In a similar way, the reentry principle suggests that our consciousness is not a fixed linear experience, but a dynamic process that constantly revisits and reinterprets itself. This feedback loop is not just about perceiving things in the world, but also about thinking about those perceptions. Every time we experience something, we don't just take it in, we also reflect on it, and that reflection becomes part of the ongoing process of awareness. It's like looking at a painting, then stepping back, reflecting on it, and then coming closer again, seeing new details with each reflection. What's fascinating about this idea is that it gives rise to a continuous process of self-awareness. The reentry principle implies that consciousness is never static, never just a passive experience. It's a dynamic flow, constantly adjusting, constantly reflecting on itself, creating a deeper, richer experience of being aware. We are not just thinking about the world, we are thinking about the world. This process of reentry happens at many levels, from simple sensory perceptions to complex thoughts. When you look at the world, your brain doesn't simply record information. It's constantly updating, adjusting, and revisiting that information. It takes in the sensory data, reflects on it, revisits it, and refines its understanding, creating a dynamic feedback loop. The beauty of the reentry principle is that it emphasizes the interconnectedness of the brain's processes. Consciousness doesn't emerge from just one part of the brain. Instead, it arises from the continuous communication and feedback between many different areas. This creates a rich, complex tapestry of awareness, where every part of the brain is constantly influencing every other part. This constant feedback loop is not just about external perceptions, but also about internal thoughts and feelings. When you have an emotional reaction to something, your mind doesn't just feel it, it reflects on that feeling, revises it, and refeels it, constantly adjusting its understanding. In this way, emotions, thoughts, and perceptions are all part of an ongoing process of self-awareness, constantly revisiting and reinterpreting itself. Imagine a river that is always flowing, never stagnant. It moves over rocks, through valleys and around bends, always shifting and changing. In a similar way, consciousness is not a single moment, but a continuous flow of thoughts, feelings, and reflections that build upon each other. Each thought flows into the next, each reflection adds depth to the next perception. This flow of consciousness doesn't just create a momentary experience, it creates a sense of continuity, of self. Even though our thoughts and feelings are constantly shifting, the reentry principle suggests that we maintain a coherent sense of who we are, because our brain is constantly revisiting and reflecting on itself. We are not just a collection of thoughts, we are a continuous process of thinking about thinking. What's interesting about this theory is that it doesn't require a fixed self to experience consciousness. Instead, consciousness arises from the ongoing interaction of the brain's processes. We don't need a permanent observer sitting inside our minds, watching everything unfold. The process of reentry itself creates the experience of self-awareness. This idea challenges the traditional notion that consciousness is simply a result of neural activity in a specific part of the brain. Instead, the reentry principle suggests that consciousness arises from the dynamic flow and feedback between different areas of the brain, creating a continuous evolving process of awareness. We are not just passive observers of our minds, we are active participants in the flow of consciousness. As I sat by the window, reflecting on the leaves, I realized that my awareness wasn't simply about looking at the world. It was about constantly reflecting on that world, revisiting my perceptions, adjusting my understanding. The reentry principle had given me a new lens through which to understand consciousness, not as a passive experience, but as an active, ever-evolving flow of awareness. And in that quiet moment, I understood that consciousness isn't something fixed or separate. It's a dynamic process, always adjusting, always revisiting itself, always reflecting. We are not simply aware of the world around us, we are constantly reflecting on our awareness, creating a deeper, richer experience of what it means to be alive. I once stood at the edge of a lake, watching the water ripple under the wind. As I reached out to touch the surface, I felt the subtle shift in my hand's movement, the way the ripple spread and danced as my fingers disturbed the water. There was a moment when I realized it wasn't just my hand moving, it was my awareness of the movement that created the feeling of connection to the world. This small moment made me think of the sensorimotor contingency theory, a theory that suggests consciousness arises from the way we interact with the world through our movements. It's not just about seeing or hearing. It's about how our senses and actions come together, shaping our awareness of the world and of ourselves. In the theory's view, consciousness is closely tied to how we predict the outcomes of our actions. When we reach out to touch something, we don't just wait for the sensation to come to us. We expect it. Our body anticipates how things will feel, and that anticipation becomes a part of our awareness. This constant back and forth between action and perception is what creates the flow of consciousness. Think about it this way. When you walk, your body knows how to move, how to place each foot in rhythm with the ground beneath you. But it's not just the physical movement. Your mind is always aware of the next step, the way the ground feels beneath your feet. This awareness is part of the sensorimotor loop, the way action and perception work together to shape your conscious experience. Every moment we interact with the world, our body and mind work in harmony. The simple act of touching something involves not just the sensation of touch, but a prediction in your mind about what that touch will feel like. Your mind anticipates how the world will respond to your actions, and this prediction guides your perception of reality. The theory suggests that this back and forth, this dance between action and perception, is the core of consciousness. You are not just passively receiving information, you are constantly engaged in a process of prediction and response, a flow of actions that shape the way you experience the world. Consciousness in this view is not something that happens to you, it happens through you, through the actions you take, and the way you perceive their effects. When you look at an object, your mind doesn't just observe it from a distance, it actively predicts how the object will appear in relation to your movement. If you shift your gaze, the object's appearance changes, and your mind adjusts to that change. This dynamic process between perception and action is what keeps you grounded in the world, aware and responsive to the things around you. This theory changes the way we think about awareness. It's not about being a passive observer of the world. It's about actively engaging with it, making predictions, and reacting to those predictions. It's the movement of the body and the anticipation of sensation that creates the feeling of being conscious, of being connected to the world in a continuous loop. In this view, consciousness is not something that simply exists in one part of the brain or in one moment. It's something that emerges from the continuous interaction between body and mind. Every step you take, every breath you make, shapes your awareness of the world. Your consciousness is constantly shifting, adapting to the movements you make and the sensations you experience. The sensorimotor contingency theory also suggests that this process is built into the very fabric of how we perceive the world. It's not something we actively control, but something we have learned to do. Our bodies and minds have evolved to predict, to act, to adjust, and in doing so, they create the ongoing flow of consciousness, moment by moment. Just like the ripple I created when I touched the surface of the lake, our consciousness is shaped by our actions. We move, we touch, we predict, and all of these actions feed back into our awareness. It's a continuous cycle where our actions create our awareness, and our awareness shapes the way we act. This idea makes consciousness feel more alive, more interconnected with the world. It's not a passive experience, but a vibrant, ever-moving flow, shaped by the subtle dance between our senses and our actions. Every thought, every perception is the result of this ongoing interaction, a loop that keeps us engaged with the world and with ourselves. When you think about consciousness through the lens of the sensorimotor contingency theory, you begin to see that it's not about isolating awareness in one part of the brain or looking for a singular source of experience. It's about understanding how we move, how we act, and how those movements shape the way we experience reality. In this way, consciousness is more than just a reflection of the world. It's a dynamic, interactive process, constantly evolving with each action we take and every sensation we feel. We are not passive observers of the world. We are actively participating in it, creating our experience with every step, every touch, every glance. As I stood by the lake, the feeling of the water beneath my fingers became more than just a sensation. It became part of the larger process, a moment in the ongoing flow of my awareness. This, in essence, is the sensorimotor contingency theory, the understanding that our consciousness emerges from the continuous interaction between our body, our actions, and the world around us. I was walking down a quiet street, my feet crunching against the fallen leaves. The world around me felt sharp and clear, the colors of autumn vivid in the golden light. But suddenly, a thought struck me. Asterisk. What if all of this is just a hallucination? Asterisk, not a random one, but one my brain is actively creating, like an artist painting a picture I'm only half aware of. This idea that consciousness might be a controlled hallucination isn't as strange as it first sounds. Imagine that everything you see, feel, and experience is a mental construct, a version of reality built by your brain. It's not that the world isn't real, but that what we perceive is a version that our minds have carefully crafted for us, adjusting to our needs, experiences, and expectations. This theory suggests that consciousness isn't a simple, direct experience of the world around us. Instead, it's more like an elaborate prediction, a model of reality that the brain creates based on sensory input, past experiences, and patterns it's learned over time. Our consciousness, in this sense, is a kind of hallucination that we mistake for reality. It's like a movie playing in our minds. The brain takes all the raw data, light entering the eyes, sounds reaching the ears, feelings in the body, and turns it into something coherent that we experience as reality. But instead of just passively receiving this information, our brain actively shapes it, filling in gaps, adjusting the picture to make it fit what we expect. This process of controlled hallucination happens in every moment. Every time you look at something, your brain doesn't just see it as it is. It interprets it, fills in details, and adjusts your perception to make sense of what you're experiencing. What we see as reality is a mixture of sensory input and these predictions, creating a seamless experience of the world. But what happens when our predictions are off? When we see something that doesn't fit with what we expect, our brain scrambles to make sense of it, adjusting its model, shifting the hallucination to match what it thinks should be happening. This is why our perception of reality can sometimes be distorted, like when we mishear a sound or see an optical illusion. In this view, consciousness is like a kind of trick. It's not about experiencing the world directly. It's about the brain constructing a version of reality that makes sense to us, that helps us navigate the world. The brain is not just observing, it's actively creating, predicting, and adjusting to create a coherent experience. This idea also explains why our perception of reality can be so different from person to person. If consciousness is a controlled hallucination, then each of us is walking around with a unique version of the world in our minds. Two people might see the same event, but their brains are filling in different details, creating different mental movies of the same reality. In a way, we're all living in our own personal simulations, shaped by our individual experiences, expectations, and perceptions. What you see when you look at a tree, for example, is not exactly the same as what someone else sees. Your brain interprets the sensory data differently, adjusting the image to fit what you know about trees, about the world, about life. This doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist outside of us. It means that what we experience as reality is always mediated by our minds. Our consciousness is a simulation, a mental model that helps us make sense of the world. The world itself might be there, but we can never truly experience it without our brain's interpretation, without this carefully crafted hallucination. The concept of consciousness as a controlled hallucination also helps explain why we can have experiences that feel so real, even when they're not. Think about dreams, for example. In a dream, you might experience a situation that feels completely real, even though you know it's not. Your brain creates a version of reality that feels just as convincing as waking life, even if it's built from nothing but mental images. In this sense, consciousness is always a kind of dream, even when we're awake. It's not a direct experience of the world, but a version of the world that our brain creates, one that's tailored to our needs, our memories, and our expectations. The brain is constantly constructing and reconstructing reality, shaping it to fit what it believes is most useful for survival, for understanding, for navigating life. The beauty of this theory is that it allows us to see consciousness not as a passive reception of the world, but as an active creative process. We are not just experiencing reality, we are creating it, every moment, with our perceptions, our thoughts, our senses. Consciousness is not something that happens to us, it's something that we actively participate in, shaping it from the inside out. This idea also invites us to reconsider what it means to be aware. If consciousness is a controlled hallucination, then the question becomes not how we experience reality, but how we can become more aware of the process through which our mind creates that reality. What happens when we realize that our consciousness is not a direct window to the world, but a mental construct? And yet, in recognizing that our consciousness is a kind of hallucination, we don't lose our connection to the world. If anything, it deepens our understanding. We begin to see that reality is not a fixed, static thing, but a dynamic, ever-changing process that our minds are constantly shaping, updating, and adjusting. What we experience as real is a dance between our minds and the world, one that we are both part of and separate from, creating meaning as we go along. In this way, consciousness as a controlled hallucination isn't about rejecting reality, it's about accepting that reality is always mediated by the mind. We are not passive witnesses to the world, we are active creators of our experience, continuously shaping and reshaping the world as we perceive it. It's not a trick, but a deep, ongoing creation. I was sitting in a cafe, watching the people around me. A man walks by, and my attention briefly shifts to him. I notice his bright red jacket, but then I wonder, how did I know to focus on that? Asterisk. It's not like I made a conscious decision to look at him, but somehow my brain decided in an instant what to pay attention to. This small moment made me think about the frame problem, how our minds decide what information is relevant in any given situation. In everyday life, we're constantly filtering out irrelevant details, yet we're not always aware of how the brain decides what to focus on. How do we experience the world with so much going on around us, yet still make sense of it? The frame problem is a puzzle that touches on how our brain processes the overwhelming amount of information it encounters every second. Our senses are flooded with data, yet we seem to handle it effortlessly. We don't need to stop and think about every tiny detail. Instead, our minds have learned to focus on what's most important at any given moment. But how does the brain decide what's important? When I noticed the man's red jacket, it wasn't a random choice. Something about that moment triggered my attention. Maybe it was the color, the contrast against the background, or even just the way he walked. The frame problem asks, how does the brain pick out these moments without getting lost in the noise? This puzzle is even more perplexing when you consider how much is going on at any given time. Every sense, every thought, every memory is competing for attention, but we don't consciously choose what to focus on. Instead, our mind seems to effortlessly decide what matters, filtering out the rest without us realizing it. The frame problem also connects to how we experience reality. We aren't aware of everything happening around us, only of the pieces that our brain deems important. We may walk through a crowded street, but we only notice the people, the sounds, the objects that matter to us in that moment. The rest fades into the background, unnoticed. This brings us back to the experience of being conscious. What we experience as real is shaped by what our brain chooses to highlight. It's not a clear-cut, perfect recording of the world. Instead, our consciousness is a filtered version, shaped by the brain's decisions about what to bring into focus, what to ignore, and what to interpret. In a way, this makes our perception of the world more like a story, a narrative that's constantly being edited and rewritten. The brain doesn't show us every detail, but creates a version of reality based on what it thinks is most relevant. We experience the world not as it is in totality, but as a curated version of reality. This idea of a curated reality can be unsettling, yet it also explains why we can move through life so fluidly. The brain's ability to filter and focus allows us to make sense of a constantly shifting world, guiding us through complex environments without becoming overwhelmed. It lets us focus on the here and now, ignoring the irrelevant, even if we don't realize it. But what happens when the brain gets it wrong, when it focuses on the wrong things or misses something important? In those moments, our experience of the world can become skewed or distorted. It's as if the story our brain is telling us has a gap or a mistake in it, and we might only notice the error after the fact. The frame problem also raises questions about what it means to be aware. If our conscious experience is a product of the brain's filtering system, are we truly aware of the world as it is, or are we only aware of a small part of it? The brain's decisions shape our perception of reality, but those decisions may leave much of the world hidden from view. In many ways, this is the constant struggle of human experience. We want to understand the world fully, but we are limited by the brain's ability to process and filter information. We want to see it all, but our awareness is shaped by these unconscious decisions about what to notice, what to ignore, and what to prioritize. And yet the beauty of the frame problem lies in the brain's ability to manage this complexity. Our experience of the world isn't random. It's shaped by the brain's remarkable ability to make decisions about what matters, creating a version of reality that we can navigate and understand, even if we're not fully aware of the process. The more we learn about the frame problem, the more we realize how little control we have over what we see. Our minds are constantly deciding what's important, what's relevant, what's worth noticing. And though we may think of ourselves as the conscious observers of the world, we are also, in many ways, passive recipients of the brain's decisions. At the same time, there's something comforting in knowing that our minds are constantly working behind the scenes to create a sense of order out of chaos. Even when we're not aware of it, the brain is managing the overwhelming flow of information, keeping us grounded in a reality that makes sense, even if it's just a partial version of the full picture. This also invites a deeper question: what would it mean to truly experience the world without the brain's filters, without the frame problem? Would we be able to make sense of anything at all, or would we be lost in a sea of sensory overload? It's a thought-provoking idea, reminding us of the complexity and beauty of our conscious experience. Perhaps in the end, it's the frame problem itself that makes our experience of consciousness so fascinating. It's not that we are always aware of everything around us, but that we trust the brain to guide us through it. We are both the creators and the consumers of the world we experience, and that in itself is a mystery worth exploring. I was walking down a familiar street when something odd happened. I passed a man on the sidewalk who smiled at me. I nodded back, thinking he was someone I knew, but as I walked on, I realized I couldn't see his face. I had just felt the presence of him, his posture, his movement, but my mind had seen him in a way I couldn't fully explain. This experience made me think about something called blind sight, a condition where people who are blind to a part of their vision can still respond to visual stimuli. They can't consciously see what's in front of them, but they can still accurately describe where things are or how objects move. It's as if perception happens without the awareness that it's happening. Blind sight is a strange, fascinating phenomenon that challenges how we think about perception. In these cases, people with damage to certain areas of the brain, the part that consciously processes vision, can still detect and respond to visual information. But because of the damage, they have no conscious awareness of seeing anything at all. It's not that these individuals don't see anything. In fact, they might be able to guess the location of objects, avoid obstacles, or even navigate complex environments, all without consciously experiencing the visual information. They are perceiving the world, but without awareness of it. Their brains are still receiving and processing visual data, but it stays hidden from their conscious mind. This brings up an intriguing idea about non-conscious perception, how we can process information without being aware of it. It's as if our brain can receive, interpret, and react to stimuli without any conscious awareness of what's going on. The blind spots in our consciousness don't mean the brain isn't doing its job. It just means we're not aware of the work being done. Imagine listening to a song. You can tap your foot to the beat without paying attention to every note or every word. Your brain is processing the music, understanding its rhythm, even though your conscious mind is focused elsewhere. This is non-conscious perception at work. The brain continues to process information, even if you aren't consciously aware of it. In the case of blind sight, the brain processes visual information, but the individual isn't aware of what they're seeing. Instead of being a simple breakdown in perception, blind sight suggests that awareness is a separate process from perception. It shows that perception can occur without conscious awareness, and that the mind is capable of processing information in the background while we focus on something else. This idea opens up a deeper question: what does it mean to truly see something? If we can process visual information without conscious awareness, what part of the mind is truly responsible for what we call seeing? It seems that our experience of sight isn't a simple one-way street from the eyes to the brain, but a complex dance of processing, reacting, and reflecting. It's possible that there are layers to perception that we aren't aware of, layers of information being processed beneath the surface of conscious thought. In fact, much of what we perceive may be happening without our awareness, with our brain quietly creating a reality from the information it processes. Conscious awareness, then, might be just one layer of a much deeper process. Non-conscious perception also invites us to reconsider how much of our world is filtered by our consciousness. What if the images, sounds, and sensations we consciously experience are only a small fraction of what our brain is actually processing? The brain is constantly working, interpreting, and responding to stimuli, even though we aren't aware of it all. This idea also challenges the classic view of perception as something that is entirely in the moment. Instead, perception seems to be a continual process, sometimes operating beneath our awareness, constructing a reality that fits with our past experiences, expectations, and predictions. We are, in a sense, living in a world built by our minds, shaped by a constant feedback loop of perception, processing, and prediction. When you consider the concept of blind sight, it becomes clear that our conscious experience is not the full picture of what's happening in our minds. We might believe that awareness is what drives perception, but in reality, it seems that perception can happen without awareness at all. The brain processes information in ways we may never fully experience or understand. Blind sight shows us that there are realms of perception beyond conscious awareness, realms that guide our behavior without us ever knowing they're there. The brain is constantly gathering, processing, and responding to the world, even in areas of life we aren't aware of. This opens up a fascinating view of the mind as something far more complex than just our conscious thoughts. This view also helps us understand how the brain manages to deal with so much information at once. We can walk down a busy street, listening to conversations and avoiding obstacles, all without fully focusing on every detail. Our brain is doing a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes, processing information that we're not consciously aware of. In a way, non-conscious perception may help explain the depth of our experience. It suggests that our minds are much more than the stream of consciousness we often think of. Instead, our awareness is just one layer, one aspect of the rich, hidden processes that occur all around us without us ever being aware of them. So when I walked down the street and thought I saw the man with the red jacket, I was tapping into that deeper process, the one where my brain was guiding my awareness, filtering the world in ways I might not fully understand. I was perceiving, but only part of me was aware of it. The rest was happening beneath the surface, unnoticed and unspoken. I once read a story about a person who, after waking up from surgery, was asked to reach for a cup with their left hand. Without hesitation, they reached for it, using their right hand. The strange part was, the person had no idea why they were doing it. Their brain had been altered in such a way that the two sides of it no longer communicated properly. The cup was right there, but the brain couldn't send the signal to the left hand to grab it. This moment made me think, what does it mean to be conscious of something if we don't even have full control of our own body? This is the essence of split brain theory. When the connection between the two halves of the brain is severed, each half can develop its own sense of awareness, leading to a kind of divided consciousness. The brain is no longer a unified whole. Instead, it becomes two distinct regions, each with its own thoughts, feelings, and even perceptions of reality. The brain, as we often think of it, is a unified whole. When we make decisions, move our limbs, or experience emotions, it feels like one single cohesive process. But in split brain patients, the communication between the two hemispheres is disrupted. This disruption leads to fascinating experiments where the two halves of the brain act almost like separate minds, each with its own awareness. In one famous experiment, a split brain patient was shown an image in their left visual field. Since the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, the person couldn't name the image, but when asked to draw it with their left hand, they did so with surprising accuracy. The right side of their brain saw the image, but the left side had no conscious awareness of it. In another experiment, the right hemisphere of a split-brain patient was shown an image of a chicken, and the left hemisphere saw a shovel. When asked to choose an object that matched, the right hand controlled by the left hemisphere picked the shovel, while the left hand controlled by the right hemisphere picked a chicken. Each side had a different sense of understanding, but neither was fully aware of the other's choices. This phenomenon shows that consciousness isn't as unified as we often think. The brain is capable of having separate streams of awareness, each with its own independent experience of the world. The two halves of the brain, each with its own sense of consciousness, are trying to make sense of the world, but they do so in different ways, creating a kind of internal conflict. The split brain experiments suggest that consciousness might not be a single cohesive experience at all. Instead, it may be a combination of separate processes that work together. Each hemisphere can be aware of different things, but those experiences don't necessarily come together into one shared awareness. The result is a kind of divided consciousness, where each hemisphere has its own perception of reality. This division between the hemispheres also makes us question the nature of self-awareness. If each side of the brain can have its own sense of perception, how do we maintain a unified sense of self? It seems that our experience of being a single coherent person is not as simple as we think. The brain's various parts might be more independent than we realize. In split-brain patients, this division often leads to strange behaviors. One hemisphere might try to act in ways that contradict what the other hemisphere is doing. It's as if the two sides are not fully aware of each other's actions, creating a kind of inner dissonance. This suggests that our experience of a unified self might be an illusion, one created by the brain's ability to synchronize the activities of its different parts. The split brain phenomenon also raises questions about the nature of free will. If the brain's hemispheres can act independently, where does true agency lie? Which part of the brain is really in control? In these cases, it seems that our sense of agency is not as simple as just one mind making decisions, but rather a dance between different centers of consciousness within the brain. It's like trying to walk while one leg wants to go left and the other right. There's a kind of chaos within the body, where each side of the brain is acting according to its own desires, not necessarily in sync with the other. This division of consciousness makes us wonder how much of our actions are truly our own, and how much are shaped by the different parts of the brain. While this division is fascinating, it also speaks to the complexity of consciousness. We often think of our awareness as a single unified experience, but the split brain theory reveals how consciousness can be fragmented. We are not just passive recipients of our experiences. Our minds are made up of different centers of awareness, each trying to make sense of the world in its own way. In a split-brain individual, one side of the brain may not even be aware of what the other side is doing. This creates a kind of cognitive dissonance, where the person is not fully conscious of the actions of their own body. It shows us that the mind is not a static, unified thing, but something that is constantly shifting and adapting to the flow of information. The split brain phenomenon also forces us to reconsider what it means to be whole. If our brain's halves can operate independently, are we truly a single entity, or are we a collection of independent processes working together? Our sense of self may be just one part of a much larger, more complex network of consciousness. In many ways, the split-brain experiments challenge our traditional view of the mind. They suggest that consciousness is not a fixed thing, but a fluid and divided experience. Each part of the brain can hold its own awareness, and it is only through their coordination that we experience the world as a single, cohesive reality. As I thought about the patient in the cafe, who reached for the cup with the wrong hand, I realized how much of our experience of being conscious is built from different, sometimes conflicting parts. Our mind is not a single observer, it's a collection of voices, all speaking their own truths, coming together to form what we call I. I was sitting quietly in my room, watching the rain tap against the window. My mind drifted, and I found myself thinking about the simple, automatic actions I was doing, the way I was breathing, the way my fingers rested on the edge of the chair. There was a subtle awareness of these things, but no sense of choosing them. This moment made me think about something called neural correlates, the parts of the brain that are linked to certain experiences. In our minds, there are specific patterns of neural activity that seem to correspond with thoughts, emotions, or actions. But what happens when these patterns occur without a sense of agency, without any conscious control? How do we experience these actions if we're not the ones making the decisions? The theory of neural correlates suggests that consciousness is deeply connected to the brain's neural activity. But the interesting part is how our sense of agency, the feeling that we're the ones in control of our thoughts and actions, can sometimes seem absent, even when the brain is clearly active. We may be aware of doing something, but it doesn't always feel like we're the ones making it happen. This disconnect between neural activity and agency raises a fascinating question. How do we experience the world as though we are in control, when in reality, much of our behavior may be determined by unconscious neural processes? How much of our conscious experience is truly within our control, and how much is simply the result of brain activity that we can't directly influence? Imagine for a moment you are walking through a crowded street. Your legs move automatically, following the rhythm of your steps. Your body knows how to navigate around people, avoid obstacles, and maintain balance without you consciously thinking about it. This is all the work of neural activity, but you don't feel like you're making those decisions actively. Your brain is doing the work, while your awareness simply follows. This disconnect is what some call the illusion of agency. We often feel as though we're the ones driving our actions, making choices, and navigating the world. But the reality is that much of what we do is guided by unconscious neural processes. Our brains are constantly running in the background, orchestrating our movements and decisions, while we remain blissfully unaware of the machinery behind them. It's a bit like a puppet show. The puppets move, seemingly guided by the puppeteer, but in reality, it's the unseen strings and mechanisms pulling the strings, guiding the actions, while the puppets themselves remain unaware. In the case of our actions, the strings are the neural networks in our brains, working behind the scenes, making decisions and carrying out tasks. When we think of agency, we often imagine ourselves as the ones pulling the strings, the ones controlling our actions. But in reality, many of those strings are already being pulled by the brain before we even realize it. We might feel as though we're making choices, but in many cases, those choices are already shaped by neural processes that are not under our conscious control. This concept challenges our traditional view of self-control. If our neural correlates are responsible for much of our behavior, then where does that leave us in terms of agency? Are we truly in control of our actions, or are we merely observers of a process that's already unfolding? These questions invite us to reconsider what it means to choose and to decide. In many ways, this makes consciousness feel less like a personal driver of action and more like an observer of a prearranged dance. The brain, with its neural networks, choreographs our movements, while our conscious mind simply experiences the dance. We feel as though we're making decisions, but those decisions might already be shaped by processes beyond our awareness. This doesn't mean that we have no control over our actions. Instead, it means that control is more complex than we often think. Our consciousness is constantly interacting with these neural processes, shaping and being shaped by them. But much of this interaction happens beneath the surface of our awareness, hidden from our conscious minds. The idea that consciousness is tied to neural correlates without direct agency leads us to reconsider what it means to be in control. If much of what we do is guided by the brain's neural activity, then control might not be about making choices in every moment, but about how we engage with those choices, how we shape them with our awareness. In some ways, this view can be liberating. If we are not solely responsible for every action, it frees us from the pressure of feeling like we have to control every aspect of our behavior. Instead, we can focus on understanding the processes behind our actions and how they shape our experience of the world. At the same time, it also invites us to think more deeply about the nature of free will. If much of our experience arises from neural activity that we're not directly controlling, what does it mean to have free will? Are we the ones making decisions, or are we simply the result of complex neural processes that we don't fully understand? This theory doesn't deny the reality of conscious experience. It simply suggests that much of our awareness and agency is a product of unconscious neural processes. Our sense of control, our sense of self, might be the result of the brain's intricate web of connections, guiding our actions and experiences in ways we cannot fully perceive. So, when I sat quietly and thought about my own breathing, I realized that even in the moments when I feel in control, my brain is always at work, orchestrating my thoughts, movements, and perceptions. I'm aware of these things, but I'm not always in control of the process. My mind is a complex network, always active, always shaping my experience, even when I don't realize it. I was sitting quietly, reflecting on the nature of the mind, when a thought occurred to me. What if I were a zombie? Not the kind that stumbles around without thinking, but a perfectly functional being who moves, talks, and interacts, yet has no conscious awareness. The thought seemed absurd, but it made me wonder, what does it really mean to be aware? This question leads us into what philosophers call the zombie argument. Imagine a world full of beings just like us, going through the motions of life, walking, talking, eating, but with no inner experience at all. These beings, called philosophical zombies, are identical to humans in every way except one: they are not conscious. They simply mimic behavior, but there's nothing going on in their minds. The zombie argument poses a challenge to our understanding of consciousness. If it's possible for something that looks, acts, and behaves just like a conscious being to exist without any subjective experience, then what does that say about the nature of our own awareness? Are we truly aware of the world, or are we just acting out a set of behaviors without realizing it? To consider this, we have to think about what it means to be conscious. Consciousness isn't just about processing information, it's about the experience of awareness, the what it's like to be you, in this moment, experiencing the world. But if a zombie can mimic this without actually feeling it, then how do we know our own experiences aren't just a sophisticated set of behaviors too? Some argue that the very idea of a zombie is impossible. If something behaves exactly like a conscious being, then it must be conscious, they say. If it looks like a person, walks like a person, and talks like a person, then surely it must feel like a person as well. But the zombie argument suggests otherwise. It raises the possibility that consciousness could be something beyond mere behavior. In this view, our consciousness is not defined by our actions or our ability to process information. It's about something deeper, something we cannot measure or observe from the outside. The zombie argument reminds us that consciousness might not be tied to our observable behaviors at all. It could be something entirely separate, hidden within the experience of being alive. This idea forces us to confront the limitations of our understanding of consciousness. We can measure brain activity, we can observe behaviors, but we cannot directly observe subjective experience. We cannot look inside someone's mind to know what they are truly feeling or perceiving. All we have is their outward behavior, which may or may not match their inner reality. Imagine you're in a room with a person who appears to be awake, aware, and interacting with the world. But what if, inside their mind, there's nothing but a blank void? The zombie argument suggests that this is a possibility, that someone could be going through the motions without ever truly experiencing anything at all. Their outward appearance would be identical to a conscious person, yet their mind would be empty. So where does that leave us? If we can't directly know if someone is conscious, how do we know that our own experience is any different from that of a zombie? How do we know that our minds aren't also simply following a set of instructions, behaving in a way that appears conscious, while actually being devoid of experience? It's a sobering thought, one that makes us question the nature of our own awareness. The zombie argument doesn't necessarily mean that we're wrong about consciousness. It simply highlights the difficulty in understanding it. It raises a question we may never be able to answer. How can we be certain that our experience is real, that we are not just sophisticated mimics of a true conscious experience. This uncertainty is part of what makes consciousness so mysterious. One possible answer is that consciousness is something we feel, something deeply personal and internal. It's not about how we behave, but about the experience of being aware of that behavior. When we are truly conscious, we know it, not just because we can act in certain ways, but because we can feel our experience unfolding from the inside. Yet the zombie argument still stands as a reminder that our certainty about consciousness is based on a complex mix of behavior, perception, and internal experience. We trust that others are conscious because they behave in ways that align with our own understanding of being aware. But what if that alignment is just a mask, a well-rehearsed performance with no experience behind it? This brings us back to the question of what it means to be really conscious. If we cannot know for certain whether another being has consciousness, does that change the way we view our own? Perhaps we will never fully understand what it's like to be someone else, to live in their mind, to feel their experience. But in that uncertainty, there is a unique kind of beauty. It's what makes our own consciousness feel precious, unique, and real. The zombie argument reminds us that consciousness is not something we can easily define or measure. It's a personal, internal experience that eludes observation. We may never truly know if another person is conscious in the way that we are, but perhaps that's not the point. What matters is that we are aware, that we experience the world in ways that are uniquely ours, and that we can trust in